Its rhythm had become familiar footsteps, echoing on cobbled streets, the hum of conversation from nearby cafes, and the neighbor's melodic singing as he hung out his laundry. It was a routine she had quickly grown to love. She didn't want to leave. Her feet carried her down the street and around the familiar corner to the cafe she had come to adore. The little shop had already set its tables out, welcoming the morning crowd. Charlotte stepped inside, the scent of fresh espresso wrapping around her like a comforting embrace. The barista's face lit up when he saw her. "Charlotte," Francesco greeted, her name rolling off his tongue in a way that made it sound like music. His English was near perfect, though his thick accent sometimes made her struggle to catch every word. "Good morning, Francesco," she replied with a smile. "The usual?" he asked, already reaching for a cup. She nodded. "Your cappuccinos are the best in Rome. Actually, the best anywhere." Francesco beamed with pride, turning to the other customers. "Did you hear that? The American woman says I make the best cappuccino." Charlotte chuckled. She was never sure if he was genuinely flattered or teasing her, but she didn't mind either way. It was comforting to have someone to talk to, even if it was just her barista. Her parents had been against her traveling alone. "You must have a friend who would go with you," her mother had insisted. But Charlotte had saved for this trip for over a decade, and none of her friends could afford to drop everything and come along. Her father had been even more resistant. "It's not safe for a young woman to travel alone," he had warned. "Dad, I live in a city," she had countered. "San Antonio isn't Rome," he'd argued. "And you don't stand out as a foreigner here." Despite their worries, she had followed her dream. These 2 weeks in Rome had been her lifelong wish, and she wasn't about to let fear keep her from experiencing them. Francesco handed over her cappuccino. "See you this afternoon?" Of course. She planned to explore the city, just as she had every day. But by late afternoon, she would return to Corso Vittorio, pass by Francesco's shop, and watch the sunset from her balcony, before preparing a simple dinner with fresh ingredients from the corner market. It was the kind of life she had always imagined. As she stepped out onto the sidewalk, she reached for her phone, wanting to capture the quiet beauty of the morning. But just as her fingers wrapped around it, she felt a sharp tug at her shoulder. For a moment, she thought she had simply dropped her purse. But then she saw him, a teenager, sprinting away, her bag clutched in his hands. "Hey!" she shouted, running after him. "Stop!" "Thief!" People turned to look, but no one reacted fast enough. The boy had too much of a lead. Within seconds, he rounded a corner and disappeared. Charlotte stopped, clutching a painful stitch in her side. She pressed a hand against her pocket. At least her phone was still there. But her passport, her credit card, and nearly €400 gone. Her father's warning echoed in her mind. This wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been traveling alone. Frustration welled up inside her. She refused to cry. "Excuse me." She looked up, startled. A man stood in front of her, tall and broad-shouldered, his light brown hair tousled by the breeze. But what struck her most were his eyes, vivid green, bright and intent. "You're American," she said instinctively. His lips curved into a small smile. "I think this is yours." He held out her purse. Charlotte gasped, reaching for it. "You got it back?" "Not exactly." He frowned apologetically. "The thief had already grabbed the cash. When he saw me coming, he dropped your bag and took off. I managed to recover a few bills, but most of it's gone." Charlotte quickly checked the contents. Her passport was still there. Relief flooded her. "If all I lost was cash, I consider myself lucky." She looked up at him, her gratitude heartfelt. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done without my passport." "That would have been a nightmare," he agreed. "You're traveling alone?" She hesitated, but there was no point in lying. "Yes." "Good for you." He smiled. "I think everyone should travel solo at least once. I've been to Europe with friends, and honestly, it's exhausting, too many arguments about where to go and what to do." Charlotte sighed. "If I'd had someone with me, maybe my bag wouldn't have been stolen." "I doubt that," he said gently. "Thieves target anyone. You just had bad luck." She nodded, still shaken. "I suppose so. By the way," he said, offering his hand. "I'm Ronan." "Charlotte." His handshake was warm, reassuring. "What brings you to Rome?" he asked. "Business or pleasure?" "Vacation," she said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "You?" "Business," he admitted. "I work for a pharmaceutical company. Here for a conference, but it doesn't start for another 2 days." Charlotte chuckled. "That sounds like a much better deal than when my company sent me to a conference. They wouldn't even pay for an extra night's stay." Ronan laughed. "I guess I got lucky. He hesitated for a second, then said, "Would you like to have dinner with me tonight?" Charlotte blinked. She hadn't expected that. But why not? She had dreamed of a romantic evening in Rome, and Ronan seemed kind. She bit her lip. "Are you sure? I mean, you don't have to." "I'd like to," he said simply. "You had a rough morning. Let me treat you to a nice meal." She hesitated for only a moment longer before nodding. "Okay." His smile widened. "Great. Where are you staying? I can pick you up." Charlotte hesitated again. "How about we meet at Francesco's? The cafe with the red door." "Perfect. 5 o'clock? I'll be there." For a brief moment, they stood there, neither quite sure how to say goodbye. Then Ronan chuckled, running a hand through his hair. "Okay, well, I'll see you tonight." "See you then," Charlotte said, offering a small wave before turning toward her apartment. As she walked back, she clutched her purse tightly. The fear from earlier was already fading, replaced by anticipation. She climbed the stairs to her apartment, dumped her bag on the couch, and checked her belongings again. Everything important was still there. Her passport, she decided, would stay behind tonight. Lesson learned. She started running a bath, the scent of rose soap filling the room. A date in Rome. It still felt surreal. She wouldn't let herself get carried away after all. It was just dinner. But still, a soft smile played on her lips as she sank into the warm water. Tonight, she wanted every moment to be perfect. Ronan was surprised to realize that he actually felt nervous as he sat in the cafe, waiting for Charlotte to arrive. When was the last time he had felt this way before a date? It had to have been years. He couldn't remember the last time he had taken dating seriously. At some point, he had decided that marriage wasn't for him. After witnessing the kind of pain and disappointment it had brought to his own family, he had written it off as something not worth pursuing. So why did tonight feel different? Maybe it was just the magic of Rome. This city had a way of wrapping you in its charm, making the air itself feel laced with romance. Everywhere he turned, history and beauty coexisted effortlessly, making every street feel like a secret waiting to be uncovered. Earlier that afternoon, he had turned a random corner and suddenly found himself standing in front of the Trevi fountain. Back home, nothing ever surprised him like that. In the U.S., every attraction made a spectacle of itself. You had to buy tickets, join a tour, or follow signs just to see something special. But here, in Rome, he had simply stumbled upon something breathtaking. The feeling had left him in awe, still lingering in his chest even hours later. And he felt the same way when he looked at Charlotte. He couldn't explain it, but something about her reminded him of that fountain, unexpected, mesmerizing, and completely out of reach anywhere else but here. As if on cue, the door opened, and she stepped inside. Dressed in a white cocktail dress that highlighted her sun-kissed skin, her long brown hair was pinned up, revealing the elegant curve of her neck. Ronan rose from his seat and moved toward her. Charlotte met his gaze and smiled. "I was a little afraid you wouldn't show up," she admitted. "Why would I do that?" She hesitated. "I don't know. It just feels unreal. A complete stranger rescues me from a purse snatcher, then asks me out to dinner. It sounds like something out of a story." She flushed slightly. "I feel ridiculous even saying that." Ronan grinned. "Are you worried I'm going to disappear at midnight?" "Something like that." He was flattered. "Would you like to grab a coffee before we head to dinner?" he asked. "No, I'm good," she said. "Great. I've already picked out a restaurant. Hope you don't mind." "That's fine," Charlotte said. "Honestly, I haven't gone out for dinner much since I got here. I don't really know the best places." "You mean to tell me that you've been in Rome all this time and haven't been dining out?" he asked, genuinely surprised. "I've been cooking at my rental apartment," she explained as they stepped outside onto the cobblestone streets. "I have to make my budget last." His brow furrowed. "I hope that thief didn't ruin your trip too badly." "It's all right," she said with a shrug. "I'll probably end up spending more than I intended. But honestly, I kind of expected that. I can't resist good gelato." Ronan laughed. "Oh, same. There's a tiny place just down that way with the best gelato in the city." Her eyes lit up. "That's the one I go to," she said. "My apartment's close to it too. Maybe after dinner, we should grab some." She hesitated, then added with a playful smile, "My treat." Ronan studied her, wondering if there was an unspoken meaning behind her words. Or was she really just talking about dessert? "Don't overthink it." "That sounds perfect," he said, smiling. A short walk later, they arrived at Mangia, the restaurant he had chosen. He held the door open for her. Charlotte hesitated. "Are you sure about this?" You don't like this place? I've never been here. It just looks expensive. Well, if you haven't been treating yourself to dinners out, it's time to start, he said. Besides, we have a reservation. We do? You can't eat here without one. He gave her a wink before turning to the hostess and providing his name. As they were seated, Ronan pulled out Charlotte's chair for her, catching a glimpse of the smooth skin at the nape of her neck. Once they were settled, he ordered a bottle of Chianti while the hostess placed menus before them. Charlotte picked hers up and frowned. There are no prices on here. Don't worry about that. You must come here often, she guessed. Often enough to know what's good, he said. Get whatever you want. She hesitated, still looking uncertain. Would you like me to order for you? He asked gently. The tension in her shoulders eased. I'd actually love that. Do you like seafood? I love it. Perfect. When the server arrived, Ronan ordered their meals in slow, careful Italian. It took a few tries, but eventually she understood. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. I didn't know you spoke Italian. I don't, really. Just enough to get by. So, you must visit often. Work? Ronan nodded. My company has a business partner here. They're hosting the conference I'm attending. But I've been here a few times just for meetings. I wish my job sent me to places like this, she said wistfully. I travel for work too, but I've never been farther than California. Where's home? San Antonio. He tried not to let his disappointment show. My company has a branch there, actually. But you don't work there, do you? No. I'm based in Boston. And it's a pharmaceutical company? That's right. You said you'd tell me about it if I agreed to dinner. She took a sip of wine, looking at him over the rim of her glass. He chuckled. That was just a line. Do you actually want to hear about my job? Absolutely, she said. If there's a branch in San Antonio, maybe I should switch careers. Ronan laughed. We're actually working on something pretty groundbreaking, a new contraceptive. She tilted her head. Birth control? For men. Her eyebrows shot up. Seriously? How does that work? It's a daily pill. While you take it, it temporarily prevents fertility. But after stopping for 2 weeks, everything returns to normal. She looked genuinely impressed. Wow. That's a game changer. That's what we're hoping. Is it available yet? Not yet, he said. It should be released later this year. Impressive, she said, taking another sip of wine. Their food arrived, and without hesitation, Ronan plated some of his pasta for her, while she shared some of her seafood in return. This looks amazing, she said. The crab is exceptional. She took a bite, her eyes closing in delight. This might be the best crab I've ever had. They continued talking and laughing, exchanging stories from their jobs. Ronan found himself completely engrossed in their conversation, something rare for him. Normally, he felt detached, watching the evening play out as if from a distance. Tonight, he was simply present. When they finished their meal, Charlotte smiled. Still up for gelato? Are you sure? After what happened this morning. I'd be getting gelato no matter what, she teased. So you're either coming with me or missing out. Ronan laughed. How can I say no to that? They walked through the winding streets, pausing in front of a small window. That's my apartment, Charlotte said. They got their gelato and sat by a fountain, surrounded by the soft hum of the city. This place is magical, Charlotte murmured. Ronan turned to her, captivated by the depth in her brown eyes. Without thinking, he leaned in, pressing his lips gently against hers. For a moment, the world faded. When she pulled away, breathless, she met his gaze. Would you like to see my apartment? She asked softly. Ronan smiled. I'd love to. She took his hand, leading him toward the street. As always in Rome, the morning sunlight streaming through the window stirred Charlotte awake. She had grown accustomed to waking up this way, but today felt different. A warm, content feeling settled over her before she even opened her eyes. Then it all came rushing back. Ronan. With her eyes still closed, she replayed the memories of the night before. They had wandered down Corso Vittorio, unable to stop touching each other, laughter mixing with the night air. He had wrapped himself around her as she fumbled with the apartment door, her mind hazy with excitement. It had been overwhelming, like forgetting how to breathe. And once they were inside, everything blurred into vivid moments. The way he had lifted her effortlessly, carrying her to the bedroom before tumbling onto the bed beside her. Later, in the shower, the sensation of warm water cascading over them, his presence enveloping her. As she breathed in his scent, she rolled over, instinctively reaching out to pull him close. But her fingers met only cool sheets. The space beside her was empty. For a fleeting moment, panic gripped her. Had last night been a dream? Could something so exhilarating and surreal have actually happened? But she was still bare beneath the sheets, her body tingling with the aftermath of their time together. The dull ache in her muscles confirmed it had been real. Yet Ronan was gone. And from the quiet stillness of the apartment, she knew he hadn't just stepped into the other room. He had left. He didn't even wake me to say goodbye. The realization sent a sharp pang through her, hollowing out her stomach. Falling asleep in his arms had felt perfect. Would she have been able to drift off so easily if she had known she'd wake up alone? It doesn't matter, she told herself firmly. You knew this was just for one night. She had accepted that from the beginning, but still, she had hoped for a goodbye. Something more than waking up to an empty bed. It's better this way, she reasoned. There would be no lingering emotions, no awkward farewell. Just a clean break. Taking a steadying breath, she sat up, pushing the disappointment aside. What difference did it make? Last night had been a dream come to life, a fleeting moment of magic she wouldn't trade for anything. Slipping out of bed, she reached for a t-shirt, glancing at her phone. She had slept much later than usual. Francesco's probably wondering where I am. Then again, maybe not. He had seen her with Ronan at the coffee shop yesterday. He might have already put the pieces together. The thought made her blush, equal parts amused and embarrassed. She moved to the kitchen, pulling coffee grounds from the fridge. As much as she craved one of Francesco's cappuccinos, today felt like a day for solitude. A quiet morning on the balcony, reflecting on everything that had happened. But as she turned toward the coffee maker, her eyes landed on something unexpected, a folded piece of paper resting on the counter. She recognized it immediately. The notepad mounted to the fridge, left there by the apartment's owner. She had never used it before, which meant this note wasn't hers. Ronan. He hadn't left without a trace. For a moment, she simply stared at it. It was like a wrapped gift, the anticipation of opening it almost better than whatever was inside. Finally, she unfolded it carefully. Charlotte, I had an amazing time last night. I hope you did too. Thank you for everything. Enjoy the rest of your vacation and have a safe trip back home. Ronan 617 555 158. She reread the note, her heart skipping. A phone number. She hadn't expected that. They hadn't discussed staying in touch, and she certainly hadn't given him hers. Did he want her to call him? He must, she reasoned. Otherwise, why leave his number? Yet, the note didn't say anything about meeting again. And if he truly wanted to hear from her, why had he left so early? Why not wait and say something in person? Maybe work called him away? He was here on business, after all. His conference started tomorrow, but perhaps something urgent had come up. Unlike her, he couldn't just laze around in bed all morning. But if that were the case, why not mention it in his note? She shook her head, unable to make sense of it. There was only one way to find out. Hurrying back to the bedroom, she grabbed her phone and carefully dialed the number. He's probably busy, she thought, pressing call. I'll just leave a quick message. Thank him for last night. That's normal. Just being polite. The phone emitted a few short beeps, then the call ended abruptly. She frowned. Had she misdialed? She tried again. The same thing happened. No ringing. Just a dead connection. Confused, she compared the number on the note to the one she had dialed. She had entered it correctly. This isn't his number. Her stomach twisted. Had he given her the wrong number on purpose? But why? She hadn't even asked for it. He could have simply left without leaving anything at all. Was it some kind of joke? No, that didn't feel right. The Ronan she had met wasn't cruel or careless. He had been kind, protective, thoughtful. The man who had chased down a thief to return her purse wouldn't have played a game like this. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe he wrote it down wrong. But who messes up their own phone number? She sighed, reading the note one more time, focusing on what she knew for sure. He had enjoyed their night together. So had she. And he wanted her to enjoy the rest of her trip. That, at least, was something she could control. She wasn't going to waste her time wondering about a man she would likely never see again. Folding the note, she tore it into pieces and tossed them in the trash. Holding on to it would only make it harder to let go. She dressed in a sundress she had been saving for a special occasion. Today is special, she decided. The morning after my Roman adventure. This would be the story she told about her trip to Rome. The one she would share with friends for years to come. Her parents would scold her for traveling alone. Maybe she'd leave out the part about nearly getting robbed. They'd be happier thinking she had simply met a charming stranger at a coffee shop. And, of course, she wouldn't mention that she had brought him back to her apartment. But she couldn't leave him out entirely. Ronan was part of this trip's magic. Taking her coffee out onto the balcony, she propped her feet up and gazed at the bustling street below. The sounds of life floated up to her, Italian voices calling to one another. A moped weaving through pedestrians. The woman across the street hanging laundry from her window. I'm going to miss this place. Ronan had told her to enjoy the rest of her vacation. And she would. This trip wasn't over. It was time to embrace every moment. Finishing her coffee, she slipped on her walking shoes. No more mindlessly wandering. Today, she would go find the Pantheon. Maybe even that charming farmer's market she had discovered on her first morning here. As she stepped outside, she glanced toward Francesco's cafe. Then, with a small smile, she deliberately turned in the opposite direction. Today would be different. She would make sure every day was different. On the flight to Rome, Charlotte had barely gotten any sleep. But on the way back home, she could hardly keep her eyes open. The past week had been a whirlwind full of new experiences and excitement. And even though nothing quite matched the unforgettable evening she had spent with Ronan, her time in Rome had opened her eyes to a world of possibilities. She had stumbled upon a charming little wine bar with a cozy library tucked away in the basement. She spent an entire day there, curled up with old books and a glass of Merlot. Most of the books were in Italian, but she managed to find a few in English, just enough to satisfy her literary cravings. On a whim, she had bought a ticket to an opera and wore her most stylish boots, even though she knew they would leave her feet aching. Not understanding the language worked in her favor without trying to follow the plot. She simply closed her eyes and let the music wash over her. Before heading to the airport, she made one last stop at Francesco's cafe. She thanked him for his kindness throughout her stay, and he wished her a safe journey home. That farewell had been emotional. Francesco's had become part of her daily routine, and she knew she wouldn't be returning. Letting go of this trip was harder than she had expected, but at the same time, the idea of being back in her own space brought a sense of comfort. She had missed her apartment, and while work wasn't something she had particularly longed for, she had certainly missed some of her colleagues. And then there were her parents. Charlotte was incredibly close to them. She had never gone more than 2 weeks without seeing them before. Her suitcase was packed with carefully chosen gifts from Rome, and she couldn't wait to surprise them. That would have to wait until tomorrow. Tonight, all she wanted was to collapse into her own bed and sleep. As the plane touched down, the jolt startled her fully awake. She waited until it reached the gate before stretching, trying to loosen her stiff muscles. The long flight had left her exhausted, and she needed to be alert for the drive home. Baggage claim felt like an eternity, but she finally retrieved her suitcase and made her way to the parking garage. Her car was exactly where she had left it, and seeing it gave her an unexpected sense of joy. It was the first real sign that she was truly home. She slid into the driver's seat, inhaling the familiar scent of leather. A magazine she had been reading before she left was still sitting on the passenger seat, just as she had left it. It felt as though she had stepped right back into her old life, as if nothing had changed. But everything has changed. She started the engine and slowly drove out of the garage, reflecting on how much her perspective had shifted. For months, she had dreamed about this trip, building up expectations in her mind. Yet, until she actually set foot in Rome, it had felt like a distant fantasy, something out of a novel rather than a real place. Now, it was strange to think that life in Rome was still continuing without her. While it was the middle of the night in San Antonio, Rome was waking up. Francesco was probably setting up his cafe for the morning rush. It felt like she had just said goodbye to him, but for him, that farewell had been yesterday. And Ronan. He was likely back in Boston by now. Charlotte wondered if he had questioned why she never called him. I doubt it. He's probably moved on from that night. She turned onto her street, and there it was, her apartment building. A sense of relief washed over her. Home at last. But as she pulled into the parking lot, she frowned. The light in her bedroom was on. Had she left it on before she left? That would mean 2 weeks of wasted electricity. Great. That bill was going to be brutal. With a sigh, she pulled her suitcase out of the trunk and dragged it up the stairs. Back to reality, she muttered. Unlocking the door, she maneuvered her suitcase inside and shut the door behind her. She was about to head to the kitchen for a drink when something made her stop in her tracks. Something was off. It wasn't just the lights, it was the whole atmosphere of the apartment. A chill ran down her spine. Then she saw it. The TV was gone. Her heart pounded as she spun toward the door. She hadn't needed her key to open it. The lock was damaged, forced open. Someone had broken in. A wave of panic surged through her. What if the intruder was still here? Grabbing her suitcase, she rushed back into the hallway and shut the door behind her. With shaking hands, she pulled out her phone and instinctively called her parents. They had always been her source of support, and even though she was in her 30s, she knew she could rely on them. Her mother answered on the first ring. Charlotte, she exclaimed. Leonard, it's Charlotte. Are you home? How was your flight? Did you get back safely? Charlotte tried to respond, but found herself choking up. To her surprise and embarrassment, tears spilled down her cheeks. Charlotte? Her mother's voice turned concerned. What's wrong, sweetheart? Are you crying? She heard her father in the background. What happened? Is she okay? I'm home, Charlotte managed to say. I'm okay. But she wasn't. What happened? Her mother pressed. Someone broke into my apartment while I was gone. Her mother gasped. A moment later, her father was on the line. What's missing? He asked. The TV, at least. Maybe more. I haven't checked everything yet. Are there any broken windows? No, she said. But the door locket was forced open. Charlotte, get out of there right now, her father said firmly. Come here. You're staying with us tonight. I need to pack a bag. It's not safe, he interrupted. Bring your suitcase from your trip. We'll sort everything else out in the morning. Okay, Charlotte whispered. Are you okay to drive? Yes, she said, though her hands were still trembling. Good. We'll leave the lights on for you. See you soon, sweetheart. Hanging up, Charlotte felt a deep sense of unease settle in her stomach. Coming home was supposed to be comforting, a time to relax before going back to her routine. Instead, she was facing police reports, missing belongings, and the unsettling knowledge that someone had invaded her space. Would she ever feel safe here again? With only a month left on her lease, maybe it was time to move. Dragging her suitcase down the stairs, she loaded it into her car and drove to her parents' house, taking deep breaths to steady her nerves. Her mother was waiting on the porch. The moment Charlotte stepped out of the car, she was wrapped in a tight embrace. I'm okay, Mom, Charlotte murmured against her shoulder. I'm just so thankful you weren't home when it happened, her mother whispered. I don't even want to think about what could have happened. It's all right, Victoria, her father said, placing a reassuring hand on Charlotte's shoulder. You two go inside. I'll get her suitcase. Charlotte let her mother lead her to the kitchen. Have you eaten? She asked. Not since the plane. I'll heat up some lasagna. Mom, it's midnight. You still need to eat. Despite everything, Charlotte couldn't resist her mother's cooking. As she sat down, her father returned, rolling her suitcase inside. You'll stay here until you figure things out, he said firmly. Charlotte felt a wave of gratitude. She had left Rome thinking she was returning to normal life. Instead, everything had changed. And tomorrow, she had even more to face. Charlotte allowed herself 3 days to deal with police reports, inform her apartment management that she wouldn't be renewing her lease, and dwell on her misfortune. She knew it would be far too easy to sink into self-pity, staying at her parents' house for weeks, letting her mother fuss over her with endless meals and her father attempt to lighten the mood. But she refused to let that happen. She had to move forward. On the 4th morning, she sat up in bed, pulled her laptop onto her lap, and updated her R-sum. After submitting 3 job applications and contacting an employment agency, she felt a sense of accomplishment. With that done, she climbed out of bed and made her way to the kitchen. As expected, her mother was already up, preparing breakfast like she had every morning since Charlotte had moved back in. The rich aroma of coffee filled the air, and the familiar sizzle of bacon on the stove greeted her. Charlotte walked up behind her mother and wrapped her in a quick hug. You know, you don't have to cook for me every morning, she said. Her mother waved off the suggestion. Nonsense. You need a good breakfast. Charlotte was slightly surprised that, despite everything, her appetite remained unaffected. Stress usually made it difficult for her to eat, but that hadn't been the case this time. I could just have cereal, she offered. Would you prefer cereal? I wouldn't mind it. But if given the choice, you'd rather have pancakes, her mother said knowingly. Charlotte grinned. I just don't want you to feel like you have to do extra work for me every day. Oh, don't be silly, her mother replied. You help out with dinner, so I'm actually cooking less than I normally would. And besides, she smiled warmly, I like making breakfast for you. Well, in that case, I won't argue, Charlotte said. Can I at least set the table? Go ahead. It's just us this morning. Where's Dad? He went to the hardware store for new tile for the downstairs bathroom. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. Didn't you just redo that bathroom last year? That was the half bath. Now we're fixing up the one at the back of the house. Want to help with the painting in a few days? Sure, Charlotte agreed. But I might be busy over the next couple of days, so let me know when you're planning to do it. Her mother turned to look at her, curiosity in her expression. Busy? With what? I started applying for jobs today, Charlotte said. Hopefully, I'll have some interviews lined up soon. Once I've secured a job, I'll also need to start looking for a new apartment. Her mother's eyes widened in admiration. That was fast. I thought you might take a little more time to settle before diving back in. Charlotte had felt like she was moving too slowly, so her mother's words caught her off guard. I just don't want to overstay my welcome, she admitted. I appreciate you and Dad letting me stay, but I want to be back on my own as soon as possible. Her mother gave her a reassuring look. You're not imposing, sweetheart. Take as much time as you need. Charlotte smiled, appreciating the support, but she knew she had to keep pushing forward. The longer she waited, the easier it would be to procrastinate on finding work and a new place. Still, at least for now, there would be plenty of pancakes. She had expected to hear back from employers quickly. Once she started applying for jobs, she assumed opportunities would come her way. But weeks passed, and not a single response arrived. The employment agency had reached out initially. They collected her information, had her complete a few skill tests, and assured her they would contact her soon. That was 2 weeks ago. Since then, silence. Her parents had been nothing but patient and supportive about her extended stay. Charlotte knew how fortunate she was to have a rent-free place to stay, and parents who genuinely enjoyed her company. Not everyone had that kind of safety net. Surprisingly, she found herself enjoying the extra time with them. Every night, she and her father played chess. Leonard usually won, but that wasn't the point. It was about the conversations, the laughter, and the way they reconnected. She tried to help with the bathroom remodel as much as possible, but her parents often shooed her away, insisting she had enough to worry about. No need to stress over a sink installation, they told her. Now, lying on her bed, she scrolled through apartment listings, searching for her next home. She found plenty of appealing options, but committing to one felt impossible. Without a job, she had no idea what she could afford. To keep herself from feeling hopeless, she started making a list, ranking apartments based on preference. Her top choice? Sapphire Streams Apartments, a quiet complex with cozy private units nestled around a picturesque lake. The place was beautiful. The only problem? She couldn't afford it on her previous salary. Would a new job offer better pay? Maybe. But there were no guarantees. Sighing, she opened her online banking app to check her savings. She had barely spent anything in the past month. But as the date on the screen registered in her mind, her breath caught. Her period was late. How did I miss that? Her last period had been just before her trip to Rome. She even remembered feeling relieved at the time, one less thing to worry about while traveling. But since returning home, everything had been chaotic. She hadn't paid attention. It wasn't surprising that she overlooked something so routine. Except this wasn't routine at all. Because it meant she might be pregnant. A strange numbness washed over her. Slowly, she stood and walked to the living room, where her parents sat, each immersed in a book. I'm stepping out for a bit, she said. Her father glanced up. Where to? Want some company? No, she replied, maybe too quickly. Just a quick trip to the store. Her mother frowned. Do you need something? I might have it here. Heat crept up Charlotte's neck. Just a candy craving, she mumbled. Grabbing her keys, she rushed out before they could ask more questions. At the grocery store, she made sure to grab some chocolate bars, something to justify her excuse. She tossed them onto the counter alongside the pregnancy test, feeling oddly like a teenager buying something embarrassing for the first time. Once the purchase was done, she hurried to her car and drove home. Upstairs, in the privacy of the bathroom, she unwrapped the test and followed the instructions. As she waited, she paced in front of the sink, gripping her phone, eyes glued to the timer, counting down 5 minutes. It was the longest 5 minutes of her life. When the phone vibrated, she turned toward the sink but hesitated. She had been running on autopilot ever since realizing she was late, doing what needed to be done without pausing to process her emotions. Now, the reality of it settled in. What was she hoping for? Logic said she should want a negative result. Her life was in limbo, no job, no income, no stability. She didn't even have a home of her own. Her future had never felt more uncertain. And she was alone. Charlotte had always imagined motherhood as part of her future, but in those dreams, she had a partner by her side. Facing it alone? That was something she had never considered. It would be difficult. At times, maybe even lonely. Yet, as she pictured the test coming back negative, an unexpected heaviness settled in her chest. A baby would be the first truly good thing to happen in a long time. Yes, it would be challenging. Possibly the hardest thing she'd ever do. But it could also be the most rewarding. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward and looked at the test. Positive. That doesn't make sense, Victoria said. You never mentioned meeting anyone in Rome. Well, we weren't planning on staying in touch, Charlotte explained. It didn't seem like something significant to mention at the time. But who is this gentleman? Her father asked, his voice filled with concern. Charlotte understood his worry. It must have been overwhelming for them to learn that their only daughter was expecting, and that the father was a man they'd never met. They had listened attentively, and Charlotte appreciated their support, even though they had many questions. He's an American, Charlotte said. He lives in Boston and works for a pharmaceutical company. Are you planning to inform him about this? Her mother inquired softly. He doesn't necessarily need to know, her father remarked. It's your personal matter. Charlotte felt a surge of gratitude. Although her father could be blunt at times, it was reassuring to have him in her corner. I couldn't reach him even if I wanted to, she admitted. There's an issue with the phone number he provided. I tried calling once, but nothing came through. Her mother nodded sympathetically. I guess that's that then. She sat beside Charlotte and gently rested her hand on her arm. Do you know what you want to do? It feels like it should be a more difficult decision than it is, Charlotte said. It's odd I expected to struggle with it, but I feel certain that I want to keep the baby. Her mother offered a warm smile. You don't need to be afraid. Sometimes you just know in your heart. Do you really think so? Charlotte asked. I knew I was ready to become a mother when I found out I was pregnant with you, her mother recalled. Charlotte couldn't help but smile. That's a different situation, though you were married, had a home, and you and Dad planned for you. The circumstances are different, her mother agreed. But at its core, it's the same journey. Your situation may be more complex, Charlotte, but if life has taught me anything, it's that nothing is ever predictable. If you want to make God laugh, you plan. Your mother's right, her father added. If you wait for everything to be perfect to welcome a child, you might never take the plunge. When you were born, we'd just bought our first house, and we were burdened with debt. Plus, your grandmother had just passed away that year. Our situation wasn't ideal either. Charlotte found comfort in her parents' words. Do you really think I'm being irresponsible by choosing to move forward now? She asked. Look at it this way, her mother replied. Once you have a child, they're with you for life. There will be ups and downs. Don't assume you can only embark on this journey when times are easy, even when things are going well. Challenges arise. You must be prepared to nurture your child through life's struggles. Charlotte nodded slowly. That makes sense. And we'll be here for you, her father said firmly. You might not have a partner right now, but you're never alone. We'd love to be part of our grandchild's life. For the first time, Charlotte heard the word grandchild, and it filled her with warmth. Even if her child were to grow up without a father, they would have two loving grandparents. And perhaps that was all that truly mattered. A family isn't defined solely by a traditional structure, but by the love shared among its members. Her father was right. She wouldn't be alone. Her mother wrapped her arm around Charlotte's shoulders. You'll stay with us until the baby arrives, she insisted. I want to have the pleasure of caring for both of you. Mom, no, Charlotte protested softly. It's hard enough having you and Dad around. A newborn would only add to the disruption. It might feel like I'm imposing on you for even longer. What do we keep telling you? Her mother chided gently. You're not imposing. Leonard, remind her of that. Of course you're not, her father concurred. We enjoy having you here, Charlotte. I know you're facing some tough challenges, and while I wish things were different, I'm truly glad to have my only daughter back home. Tears welled in Charlotte's eyes. You both are the best, she whispered. Thank you for always supporting me. Of course, we will always be here for you, her mother said warmly. Charlotte leaned in and hugged her mother tightly. If I become a good mother, it's because I've had the best example to follow, she said. Her father patted her shoulder. Come on, he said. Let's check how much of your old baby items we have in storage. We should start transforming that spare room of yours into a cozy nursery. Ronan knew he should have been honest about who he truly was. For weeks, that thought had haunted him, resurfacing no matter how hard he tried to push it away. It gnawed at him, a relentless reminder of what he hadn't said. I should have told Charlotte the truth. Maybe then, she would have called. It surprised him that he even wanted her to. He had been caught off guard by his own actions when he scribbled down his number for her. How long had it been since he had done something like that? Since he had actually hoped for a woman to reach out after a night together? Probably years. Yet, he couldn't shake thoughts of her. That was what truly unsettled him. Weeks had passed since their night in Rome, and logically, he should have moved on. But every day, he found himself checking his phone, hoping to see her name on the screen. She never called. At this point, it was obvious that she never would. And he felt ridiculous for still holding on to hope. But no matter how foolish it seemed, he couldn't let go of the idea that if she had known who he really was, Not just some salesperson, but the CEO. She might have made a different choice. Still, maybe it was better that he hadn't told her. The last thing he wanted was a woman who was only interested in him because of his status. Charlotte hadn't struck him as someone like that. She had been hesitant even to let him pay for dinner, as if she wasn't used to such gestures. But maybe he had misjudged her. It didn't matter now. Whatever he had hoped for with her wasn't going to happen, and he needed to move on. Tonight, however, he had more pressing matters to deal with. His father. Since returning from Rome, Ronan had avoided his family as much as possible. He loved them, of course, but love didn't mean he wanted to be around them all the time. After a long day of meetings with his board of directors and department heads, all he really wanted was to ditch his suit, grab a beer, and relax. But his father expected him at dinner, dressed to perfection. The meal would take place at one of his father's luxury hotels, as usual. Not like they'd throw us out if I showed up in something casual, he mused. Dad does own the place. But his father was obsessed with appearances. No member of the family was ever allowed to be seen in public looking anything less than impeccable. A car had been sent to his penthouse to pick him up. As usual, the driver remained silent, only offering a nod when Ronan greeted him. His father's drivers were under strict instructions never to engage in conversation. Ronan had always hoped one of them would break that rule, but none ever did. The hotel was a grand display of wealth and power, towering over the city with its glass facade. Stepping inside, Ronan quickly spotted his father already seated at their table, waiting for him. Ronan slid into his chair. "Good evening, father." "Let's not waste time with pleasantries," his father replied. "The waiter will return with our wine soon. Use this time to decide what you're ordering." "Nice to see you too." Ronan picked up the menu, though he hardly needed to. He had been dining at this hotel his entire life, and the menu rarely changed. He knew the options by heart. The server arrived with a bottle of white wine. Ronan preferred red and poured a sample for his father. With a curt nod of approval, his father allowed their glasses to be filled. Once their orders were placed, his father got to the point. "Tell me about your trip to Rome." Ronan raised an eyebrow. "You actually want to hear about my trip?" "I want to hear about the conference," his father clarified. "The connections you made. The networking opportunities you took advantage of." Of course. His father had drilled the importance of networking into him since childhood. First impressions, charm, influence, those were the only things that truly mattered in his father's world. "It went well," Ronan said. "It was a 2-day conference, so the opportunities were somewhat limited." "There are always opportunities," his father interrupted. "Did you go out for drinks with the other attendees? Did you take advantage of informal gatherings?" Ronan suppressed a sigh. "Yes, father." "Good," his father said, sipping his wine. "Because you were in Rome for 4 days, not 2. And I'd hate to think you wasted your time sightseeing." Ronan didn't reply. The idea of visiting Rome without exploring its beauty was absurd. He had inherited his father's business acumen, but he would never share his relentless focus on work. If his father knew about Charlotte. Stop it. Stop thinking about her. Enough. He needed a distraction. Anything to pull his mind away from her. "How's Mom?" he asked. "I haven't seen her since I got back." "She's fine," his father said dismissively. "Traveling for business." "Where to?" "Las Vegas. Checking in on the hotels there." Ronan exhaled sharply. His mother was a partner in the business, constantly being sent across the country for meetings. Didn't she just get back from Vancouver? "Business never stops," his father said, as their meals arrived. Ronan eyed his plate, but found he had little appetite. "You should let Mom stay home longer between trips." His father barely glanced up. "She chooses to go. She's committed to the company. But don't you think she wants to spend time with you too?" Ronan asked. "You two barely see each other. She came back. You left for New Orleans. Now you're home and she's in Vegas. When do you actually spend time together?" "We talk constantly," his father said. "Emails, phone calls. We're always in communication." Ronan shook his head. He would never understand how his parents treated their marriage like a business arrangement. Had it always bothered him? Or was it only now after Rome, after Charlotte, that he was noticing it? Pushing his thoughts aside, he focused on his father's next question. "Tell me about your company's future prospects," his father said. "You mentioned a new product." Ronan welcomed the change in topic. "Yes. A new male contraceptive. It's about to enter mass production." "You think that's a wise move?" his father asked. "The market is saturated. People already have their preferences." Ronan smirked. "They do. But the market is always growing. Every day, young people start needing contraceptives for the first time. There's always a new customer base." His father nodded. And your second reason? Gender equality, Ronan said. Women carry most of the responsibility for contraception. Our product changes that. It gives men an option. And once it's available, every woman will want her partner to use it. His father leaned back, considering. The marketing writes itself. Exactly. What Ronan didn't say was how much this meant to him personally. How he wanted to make a real difference. His father wouldn't care about that part. After dinner, Ronan lingered long enough to leave a tip before heading to his car. The driver remained as silent as before. They must laugh at us, Ronan thought. He almost hoped they did. Back in his penthouse, he switched on every light, filling the space with brightness. The modern luxury of his home was undeniable top-tier appliances. A massive TV, a game room with a pool table. But without someone to share it with, it all felt empty. He had considered getting a roommate once, but who could afford to split a place like this? The loneliness would pass. It always did. Still, maybe that's why Charlotte lingered in his thoughts. It wasn't her specifically. Just the feeling of not being alone. Charlotte unrolled her yoga mat on the recreation center floor and took a seat, glancing around the room. She was surrounded by women in different stages of pregnancy. Some had prominent, rounded bellies, while others, like her, weren't yet showing and sat there looking somewhat anxious and out of place. Where's Dad? A woman with striking red hair asked, laying out her mat beside Charlotte. Charlotte turned her head. The woman seemed about her age and was accompanied by a dark-haired man who appeared attentive and caring. Excuse me? Charlotte responded. The baby's father, the woman clarified. Is he just parking the car? Charlotte hesitated before swallowing. No, he's, not involved. The woman's eyes widened before she smacked her forehead lightly. Oh, wow, nice one, Anna. I really put my foot in it. I'm so sorry. That was an insensitive question. Charlotte offered a small smile. No, it's okay. I'm sure I'll be hearing it for the next couple of decades, so I might as well get used to it, right? I know you didn't mean any harm. Anna sighed in relief. Thanks for understanding. This is my first time here. Same here, Charlotte said. How far along are you? 6 weeks. Me too. Pregnancy buddies. Anna grinned and held up a hand for a high five. Charlotte chuckled, returning the gesture. She liked the idea of having a friend to share this journey with. Anna gestured toward the man beside her. This is my husband, Oliver, she said. Your first baby? Charlotte asked. Yep. Yours? Yes. Feeling nervous? Oh, completely, Anna admitted with a soft laugh. We have no clue what we're doing. But people say you figure it out along the way. Hopefully, that's true. The instructor took her place at the front of the room, and Charlotte turned her attention forward. The session was focused on breathing exercises, primarily for those nearing their due dates. Toward the end of class, everyone gathered around a woman named Melissa, who was due any day now. They showered her with encouragement, hugs, and well wishes. Charlotte was surprised when she, too, was included in the tradition, despite being new. One day, that'll be me, she thought. Most of these women won't be here by then, but there will be new faces, some who've been with me through this whole journey, and others just starting out, just as I am now. Her parents had been right. She wasn't going to be alone. This class, along with her family, would provide her with support. As the session wrapped up, Charlotte and Anna exchanged phone numbers and social media details while rolling up their mats. Charlotte felt content. The class had exceeded her expectations, and she had made a friend in the process. But as she drove home, Anna's initial question echoed in her mind. Where's Dad? She could handle awkward inquiries, but what about her child? She imagined the years ahead, when her little one would inevitably face the same question from teachers, friends, and strangers. The thought was heartbreaking. No child should have to explain the absence of a parent. I need to do something, Charlotte resolved. I have to at least try to reach out to Ronan to let him know. She had no idea how he would react, but she owed it to her child to tell him. Back at her parents' house, Charlotte went to her room and powered on her laptop. She accepted Anna's friend request, then hesitated before typing Ronan and pharmaceutical into the search bar. Several results popped up, but none of them matched him. One was much older. Another was too young. One lived in California. None were in Boston, and their photos didn't resemble the man she had met. But she wasn't ready to give up. She remembered he had attended a conference in Rome. Maybe that was a good place to start. A quick search led her to the event's website, and her heart pounded as she spotted the dates. They matched the time frame when she and Ronan had crossed paths. This has to be it. Scrolling down, she found a link labeled ATTENDEAs and clicked on it. The page displayed a list, not of individuals, but of pharmaceutical companies. Dozens of them, all with similar names. Where do I even start? Checking each company's employee directory would take forever. Maybe she could narrow it down to businesses based in Boston, but even that seemed overwhelming. However, each company had likely only sent a handful of representatives to the conference. If she could get that list, she might be able to track Ronan down. Maybe. She quickly drafted an email to the conference organizers, inquiring whether attendee names were available. The response came surprisingly fast. Unfortunately, we cannot disclose personal information about attendees due to GDPR regulations. Charlotte sighed. So much for that lead. She wasn't giving up, but she needed a different approach. A new email notification popped up. She clicked it without thinking, then froze as she saw the sender, the employment agency. Ronan momentarily disappeared from her mind as she read the message. They had scheduled her an interview. An actual interview. For weeks, she had felt like she was getting nowhere, like she might never move forward. But now, finally, someone wanted to meet with her. Maybe even hire her. She reread the email, absorbing the details. The interview was for a phone sales position at Synthogen, scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m. Charlotte's pulse quickened. She leaped out of bed and went to her closet, rifling through her clothes for something professional. If she made a good impression, her job search could be over. I could be working by next week, she thought. Earning my own money again. And since her parents insisted she stay with them until the baby was born, she'd be able to save nearly every penny for her child's future. That meant security. Stability. The email hadn't mentioned the salary, and sales jobs were unpredictable. She could earn as much as she had at her previous job. She could make more. Or she could make significantly less. If that happened, having savings would be essential. Don't get ahead of yourself, she reminded herself. You don't have the job yet. She didn't want to assume victory too soon. Getting her hopes up prematurely would only lead to more disappointment. And she had had more than enough of that recently. But she also refused to feel defeated. She was a capable employee with solid experience, and she was confident that her former employer would give her a good recommendation. She quickly replied to the employment agency, confirming the interview. Then, stretching out on her bed, she placed a hand over her stomach and let a smile spread across her face. For the first time in a while, things were looking up. Synthogen's offices were nestled in the bustling center of San Antonio, housed in a sleek brick building with wide, reflective windows. Charlotte pulled into the parking lot, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. Behind a polished oak desk sat a friendly receptionist who greeted her with a warm smile. "How may I assist you?" "My name is Charlotte Calloway," she replied. "I have an interview scheduled with Madeline Moss." The receptionist quickly checked a logbook before nodding. "Miss Moss has been informed of your arrival. You may take a seat over there." Charlotte settled into one of the plush armchairs, taking in the office environment. A tall potted tree stood beside her, partially blocking her view of the entrance. She debated whether to touch the soil to see if it was real, but decided against it. Dirty hands wouldn't make the best impression in an interview. The atmosphere in the office seemed inviting. Employees were engaged in conversations, leaning over cubicles to chat between phone calls. Smiling faces filled the space, which was reassuring. Her gaze wandered to the large glass doors just as a sleek limousine pulled up outside. She frowned slightly. Who arrived at work in a limo? Curious, she leaned back slightly, using the tree as a shield so she could observe unnoticed. The car door swung open, and the passenger stepped out. Charlotte's breath hitched. Ronan. He was right there, just a few steps away. What were the chances? But there was no doubt it was him. She would have recognized him anywhere. It felt surreal, seeing him in this setting. The last time they'd been together, they had been wrapped up in a magical night in Rome. Now, here he was, in her hometown, stepping into the same building where she was about to interview. Did he come here looking for me? No, that was impossible. He had no way of knowing she was here. Then realization struck her. Synthogen was a pharmaceutical company. Her stomach twisted. She had seen their name on the list of conference attendees. How had she not connected the dots when she scheduled this interview? But why would she have? He had told her he worked in Boston. What was he doing in San Antonio? Ronan walked in with complete confidence, bypassing the receptionist, and heading toward a door at the far end of the room. Without hesitation, he entered and disappeared inside. He works here, she thought, feeling slightly dazed. No, more than that, he belongs here. The way he moved, the certainty in his step. Like he was in charge. Charlotte rose from her seat and approached the receptionist again. "Excuse me," she said hesitantly. The woman looked up. "Yes? That man who just came in, who is he?" The receptionist glanced toward the hallway Ronan had disappeared into. That was Mr. Lancaster. She frowned slightly. But I don't believe you're scheduled to meet with him. No, I'm not, Charlotte admitted. Does he work here? The receptionist gave her an odd look. Not on a daily basis. What does that mean? Why do you ask? Charlotte realized how nosy her questions must have sounded. I know him, she said quickly. We went to school together. The receptionist's expression brightened. Oh, so you're from the East Coast? Charlotte's stomach dropped. She had just backed herself into a corner. Why had she even said that? This was not the way to start a job interview. She forced a polite smile. I just didn't expect to see him here, she said. I thought he lived in Boston. He does, the receptionist confirmed. Synthogen's headquarters is in Boston. So he works out of that office? He's the CEO, the receptionist said matter-of-factly. He visits this branch often to oversee operations. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. The CEO? Ronan was the CEO of Synthogen? He had never mentioned that. In Rome, he had acted like they were equals, both working in sales. He had let her believe that. No wonder he had treated her to that extravagant dinner. To him, it was probably just another routine night. Maybe he did this all the time, wined and dined women who thought they had stumbled into something special. A bitter taste settled in her mouth. Had she been naive to think that night had meant anything to him? Still, this changed everything. Now, she had a way to reach him. Now, her child might have a chance to know their father. Charlotte Calloway? She snapped out of her thoughts and turned toward the voice. A woman holding a folder stood by the receptionist's desk. I'm Madeline Moss, she said. If you're ready, please follow me. Right. The interview. Charlotte took a deep breath, pushing her emotions aside. She couldn't afford to get distracted now. Squaring her shoulders, she followed Madeline toward her office. So, Charlotte, Madeline said, what draws you to Synthogen? Why do you want to be a part of our team? Charlotte always found questions like this tricky. The honest answer was that she needed stable employment with a good salary and benefits. But, of course, that wasn't the response they wanted. She needed to make them believe this was her dream job. An idea struck her, and she spoke without hesitation. I'm really passionate about advancements in reproductive health, she said. I've read that Synthogen is leading the way in that field. Madeline glanced up from her notes, raising an intrigued brow. Oh, that's good to hear. You've certainly done your research. If, by research, you mean spending a night with the CEO, then yes, I have. Well, you're absolutely right, Madeline continued. In fact, we have a groundbreaking new product launching very soon. Really? That caught Charlotte off guard. Ronan had mentioned that he was using the company's latest contraceptive. He had relied on it the night they had been together. And clearly, it hadn't worked. But that was weeks ago. Maybe they had worked out the flaws since then. It's been a long time in development, Madeline said, unaware of Charlotte's inner turmoil. Everyone here is excited about what this means for the industry. Charlotte hesitated before asking, is that why the CEO is visiting? I noticed him arrive earlier, and your receptionist mentioned his name. Madeline nodded. Yes, he's here to meet with local executives and board members based in San Antonio. You're aware that Synthogen's headquarters is in Boston? I am, Charlotte confirmed. It's refreshing to meet an interviewee who's taken the time to learn about the company, Madeline said with a smile. Charlotte saw an opportunity and seized it. The CEO, will he be here for long? Just a few days, Madeline said. He's flying back on Thursday. Mr. Lancaster doesn't usually stay here for extended periods. Charlotte's pulse quickened. Would it be possible to schedule a meeting with him while he's in town? Madeline's friendly expression dimmed. He typically doesn't take meetings at this level, she said. Synthogen is a large corporation, and Mr. Lancaster's time is extremely limited. I understand, Charlotte said. But if someone could just ask him, I believe he'd want to see me. Madeline narrowed her eyes slightly. Are you sure you're here for an interview? Charlotte stiffened. What do you mean? Our company has its share of critics, Madeline said, watching her closely. If you're here representing a rival business or some kind of opposition group, I need to know now. We don't have time for that kind of interference. No, Charlotte said quickly. That's not it at all. I really am interested in the position. Madeline folded her arms. Then why do you want to meet Mr. Lancaster? He isn't involved in the hiring process. Charlotte hesitated, then scrambled for a reasonable explanation. I just admire his leadership, she said. His vision must be incredible. I'd love to meet someone who has had such a profound impact on the industry. Madeline seemed to relax a little. He is excellent at what he does, she admitted. It makes sense that someone enthusiastic about pharmaceuticals would want to meet him. Hope flickered in Charlotte's chest. So, do you think? I'm afraid not, Madeline said firmly. His schedule is already packed, and he's only here for a few days. I can't interrupt his itinerary for something like this. Charlotte nodded, forcing herself to stay composed. She still wanted this job, and pushing the issue wouldn't help her chances. She would have to let it go for now. Still, she had gained something valuable today. She knew exactly where Ronan was and how long he'd be in town. Now, the real question was what she was going to do about it. She made it through the rest of the interview, though she wasn't sure she had performed at her best. Her mind kept drifting, but she managed to stay engaged enough to answer Madeline's questions properly. Finally, Madeline set down her pen and stood. Thank you for coming in, she said. We'll be in touch about next steps. Thank you, Charlotte said, offering a polite smile. I look forward to hearing from you. As she walked toward the exit, her gaze drifted toward the office Ronan had entered. The door remained closed. It would only take a few steps to cross the room and knock. But she didn't dare. The entire office would witness it. Someone might stop her before she even reached the door. And the last thing she wanted was to be seen as some desperate woman chasing after Ronan. He wouldn't understand why she was really here. The entire drive home, Charlotte wrestled with what to do. One thing was clear: she couldn't let this chance slip away. Ronan would be in town until Thursday. After that, he would return to Boston, and she had no idea when, if ever, she'd see him again. If she landed the job at Synthogen, her chances of crossing paths with him would increase significantly. She hoped she would hear good news soon. But she couldn't just sit and wait. She had to take action. She needed to tell him the truth now so he could decide what role he wanted to play. And more than that, I want him to be involved. The realization struck her deeply. She didn't need Ronan's help to raise her child, but she wanted them to have a connection with their father. That was important. One way or another, she would speak to him before he left town. By the following day, Charlotte had devised a plan. She parked her car in front of the Synthogen building and stepped inside with a confident stride. The receptionist greeted her with a warm smile. Back already? I take it your interview went well. Charlotte returned the smile. Actually, she said, keeping her tone light, I think I may have lost one of my earrings in the interview room. Would it be all right if I took a quick look? Oh, the receptionist said, tilting her head. I haven't seen any jewelry turned in. It probably fell near the plant in the corner, Charlotte suggested. It might have gone unnoticed. The receptionist hesitated. I could check for you, she offered. I wouldn't want to trouble you, Charlotte said with a reassuring smile. I'll just pop in and take a quick look. The girl still seemed uncertain, but just then the phone rang. She answered it, holding up a finger to indicate that Charlotte should wait. Taking advantage of the distraction, Charlotte nodded as if in acknowledgement, then quickly made her way toward the interview room before the receptionist could stop her. The absence of Madeline Moss was a relief. If Madeline had been around, she would have intercepted Charlotte immediately. But no one else in the office recognized her. Well, almost no one. As she passed a conference room, she spotted him through the glass. Ronan was seated at the head of the table, engaged in discussion with a group of executives. Perfect. She didn't want to interrupt, but she knew she could catch him as soon as the meeting ended as long as she wasn't caught herself first. She took a seat in an unoccupied cubicle nearby, keeping a close eye on the conference room door. A part of her wished she had worn a disguise. If Madeline Moss spotted her, her job prospects would be ruined. Finally, the meeting wrapped up. The attendees stood, gathering their papers and exchanging final remarks. Charlotte stood too, readying herself. She knew this was her one shot. And luck was on her side. Ronan was the first one to step through the door. Charlotte moved forward, positioning herself directly in his path. Excuse me, he said automatically, stepping aside before realizing who she was. Then he froze. His gaze sharpened as recognition set in. Hi, Ronan, she said, her voice softer than she'd intended. His expression remained unreadable. Charlotte. She had imagined different reactions: surprise, even happiness, but at least she had his attention. Can we talk privately? She asked. He frowned. This is my workplace, Charlotte. I know, she said quickly. I found that out yesterday. I had an interview here. I saw you. You applied to Synthogen? He asked, skeptical. Why? She hesitated, unsettled by his guarded tone. I just need to speak with you in private. I don't have time right now, he said firmly. My schedule is packed. And if you wanted to talk, you could have reached out weeks ago. How? She challenged. I had no way to contact you. I left you my number. It didn't work. Mr. Lancaster? A voice from inside the conference room interrupted. Is everything all right? We're fine, Ronan called back, his tone clipped. Would you like me to get someone? No. We're fine. He took Charlotte by the arm and guided her a few steps away. What do you want? Can't we talk in your office? She pleaded. No, he said. I heard someone was trying to get a meeting with me after an interview yesterday. That was you, wasn't it? It was, she admitted. But, Ronan. Just say what you came to say, he cut her off. Irritation flared in Charlotte. He was acting as if she had done something wrong. She hadn't been the one who gave out a faulty number. And now he was acting like she was the problem for trying to reach him? Fine. If he didn't want to talk in private, they'd talk here. I'm pregnant, she said. And you're the father. His face went blank. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Charlotte felt a wave of sympathy. She remembered how overwhelming the news had been for her. She could only imagine how it felt for him to hear it out of the blue. I wanted to tell you privately, she explained. That's why I tried to meet with you yesterday. And that's why I'm here now. His mouth opened, then closed as if he was struggling to find the right words. I just thought you should know, she continued. And I want the baby to have a father. Even if you don't want to be too involved, I want our child to know who you are. That's not asking too much, is it? Ronan shook his head, though it wasn't clear if he was agreeing or just processing. How long have you known? He finally asked. A few weeks, she admitted. And you didn't call me? Ronan, I tried. The number didn't work, she said. I thought maybe you gave it to me on purpose, so I wouldn't be able to reach you. He looked stunned. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her call history. Look, she said, holding the screen up. I called. Multiple times. Ronan frowned, inspecting the screen. Then he shook his head. That's the right number. He squinted, then his expression shifted. Were you still in Rome when you made those calls? Yes. You didn't include the country code, he said. That's why it didn't go through. What? Have you never made an international call before? No, she admitted. That was my first time out of the country. You needed to dial 1 first. He tapped her phone, pressed call, and a ringing sound came from his pocket. See. The number was fine. Charlotte's stomach sank. I could have reached him this whole time, but it wasn't entirely her fault. He could have told her about the country code. He knew she wasn't experienced with international travel. Okay, she said, pushing past that realization. So now I have your number. That's great. But I'm here now, and you still haven't answered me. You're going to be a father. What do you have to say? Mr. Lancaster? They both turned. A gray-haired man in a tailored suit stood in the conference room doorway, his expression unreadable. Is what she's saying true? Ronan hesitated, then nodded. I have no reason to doubt it. Charlotte let out a breath of relief. At least he wasn't denying it. The man sighed, closing his eyes briefly. Then he opened them and nodded. Both of you. Come inside. Charlotte hesitated. Me too? Yes, ma'am, he said, before stepping back into the room. Charlotte looked up at Ronan. He looked uneasy. You'd better come in, he murmured, leading her into the conference room. There were no available seats at the conference room table, each one occupied by board members and key managers of the San Antonio branch of Synthogen. Charlotte stood uneasily against the wall, uncertain of where to go. Ronan motioned toward the chair he had been using during the meeting. Sit there, he instructed. She hesitated, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. He understood why. That chair was at the head of the table, the center of attention. It's fine, he assured her. Just sit. Reluctantly, she complied. Samuel Thornton, one of Ronan's primary investors, spoke up first. We heard your conversation outside, he said. So don't bother trying to deny anything. Ronan felt irritation prickle at him. I had no intention of lying. You never mentioned this before, Patricia Grayson accused. You never told us you had a child on the way. If you really overheard everything, then you'd know I just found out myself, Ronan shot back. What exactly do you want from me? The truth, Patricia demanded. I haven't lied, Ronan said firmly. I've kept no secrets. This is new information for me too. And honestly, it's deeply personal. I don't see why I should have to explain myself to any of you. Oddly, the anger was almost welcome. He had something to direct his frustration at Patricia, and Samuel were completely out of line. He could handle this. What he wasn't sure how to handle was what Charlotte had just told him. Pregnant. He was going to be a father. That realization loomed over him, but he didn't have time to process it now. He had to handle his board first. Samuel's voice cut through his thoughts. Who is this woman? That's none of your concern, Ronan said sharply. I'm a partner in this company, Samuel insisted. She has nothing to do with the company. Oh, really? Then why is she here, causing a disturbance in the middle of a workday? I apologize, Charlotte interjected. I had an interview here yesterday. Samuel scoffed. This is the kind of person you're hiring now? Excuse me? Charlotte asked, color rushing to her cheeks. Ronan's patience thinned. There's no need to speak to her like that. How do we even know she's pregnant? Patricia challenged. Charlotte stood abruptly, clearly fed up. All right, she said. I think I'll let you all sort this out among yourselves. She turned to Ronan. Your friend here is right. Go ahead and toss my application. I'm obviously not a good fit for this company. I'd say that's an understatement, Samuel said smugly. Damn it, Samuel, Ronan snapped. Enough. He turned to Charlotte. Please, sit down for a moment. Why should I? She asked, arms crossed. I know they're being appallingly rude, Ronan admitted. But this isn't about you. It's about me. She frowned. Meaning? They know I was using the new contraceptive pill, Ronan said, shifting his gaze to the board. That's what this is really about, isn't it? You're worried that this means Androsil isn't as effective as we claimed. And now you're taking it out on her. We don't know that Androsil failed, Patricia countered. We don't even know this woman. How do we know she's actually pregnant? And if she is, how do we know you're the father? I have no reason to lie, Charlotte said flatly. Of course you do, Samuel sneered. What woman wouldn't want a rich CEO to take financial responsibility for her child? Sounds like you just hit the Samuel pot. Charlotte's eyes narrowed. You think I'm here for his money? Wow, you're a real piece of work. Ronan, Ryan Hendricks, finally spoke up. He was a quieter investor, but usually the voice of reason when he did. We need to contain this before it becomes a larger issue. You're right, this raises serious doubts about the drug's effectiveness. If she's telling the truth, we have decisions to make. And we need to handle them quickly and privately. Exactly, Patricia said. We need to ensure this doesn't leak. If the press catches wind of this, our reputation will be ruined. Androsil would never make it to market. I'm not planning on telling anyone, Charlotte said, now visibly frustrated. I came to inform Ronan that he's going to be a father. He had a right to know. I don't see why I have to answer to the rest of you. And I certainly don't intend to broadcast this to the world. Samuel turned to the board. Should we consider legal action? Ronan's expression darkened. Absolutely not, he said firmly. She hasn't done anything wrong. We're not taking her to court. This is how companies fall apart, Samuel argued. It starts with one incident. This isn't some corporate disaster, Ronan said, exasperated. You're all blowing this way out of proportion. This doesn't need to leave this room. Charlotte said she won't tell anyone, and I believe her. Unless she changes her mind, Samuel said, and decides she wants a payday. Charlotte let out a hollow laugh. I can't believe I ever wanted to work here. Ronan rose. You should go, he said to Charlotte. She blinked. What? Go home, he said. I'll handle this. Her gaze wavered. I know I caused problems by coming in like this. I really did want to tell you privately. I needed you to know. You could have called again. She flinched, and he regretted the words immediately. He knew an international call wasn't always easy. But still it irritated him that a simple mistake had caused this whole situation. He felt exposed, humiliated. Now he had to sit in front of his investors and discuss his personal life like some kind of case study. He had to break down his private choices, his use of the drug, and figure out what had gone wrong. I'm going to be a father, he thought. And all I can think about is damage control. He was becoming his father. A suffocating feeling crept in. Too many things were happening at once. Charlotte's revelation. The judgment from his board. The future implications, both personal and professional. I know I should have called again, Charlotte admitted, but I didn't think it would work. And I knew if I didn't say something now, you'd go back to Boston, and I'd lose my chance. She bit her lip. You deserve to know. And the baby deserves to know you. Samuel let out a derisive snort. And you deserve a hefty child support check, right? Ronan clenched his jaw. Go home, Charlotte. Aren't you going to say anything? She asked, her voice tight. I need time, he admitted. To think about what? She asked. I'm not asking for anything. Despite what your colleagues seem to believe. You blindsided me with this, he said. You've had time to process it. I haven't. Charlotte pointed at Patricia. Do you believe her? Do you think I'm lying? You don't have to be angry, he said. though he knew how hollow it sounded. She blinked rapidly. "I've been going through this alone, Ronan." "And now you've told me," he said. "But I need time." "Ronan." "Come with me," he said, heading for the door. She followed. Samuel started to protest, but Ronan cut him off. "I am still the CEO. Wait here." "Once outside?" Charlotte asked. "Will you call me?" He held up his phone. "I have your number." That's not an answer. He didn't know what to say. Everything was happening too fast. "I'll call you," he finally said. Her eyes shone with unshed tears. "I thought this would go differently." "I'm sorry," he murmured. "You weren't like this in Rome," she said softly. That hurt. "I was on vacation," he deflected. "You were working." He opened the door. "I'll call you." She gave him a long look, then walked away. Ronan exhaled heavily, watching her go. She's pregnant. And everything was about to change. The boardroom was in chaos. Samuel Thornton and Ryan Hendricks were on their feet, their voices clashing as they tried to drown each other out. Patricia Grayson's fingers flew over her keyboard, her focus intense. The rest of the board members stood in small clusters, whispering anxiously amongst themselves. Ronan felt a surge of anger rise within him. How could they be so indifferent? He had just discovered he was going to be a father, yet no one seemed to care about the gravity of that moment for him. Instead, all they were concerned about was how this would impact Synthogen. He shut the conference room door with deliberate force, and just as he hoped, the room fell silent. Samuel and Ryan stopped arguing, and the rest of the members turned their attention to him. "Take a seat," Ronan instructed. Technically, they weren't obligated to listen, these were investors, not employees, but Ryan sank into his chair without hesitation. Ronan gave him a nod of acknowledgement. Samuel, however, remained standing. "Is she gone?" he asked. "Yes, she left," Ronan replied. His jaw tightened. "And by the way, you treated her terribly." "She didn't deserve that." "She could ruin everything for us," Samuel countered. Ronan shook his head. "Even if that were true, which it isn't, she hasn't done anything wrong. She only came here to talk to me, something she had every right to do given the circumstances." It felt strange to defend Charlotte after the way he had spoken to her. He had been too harsh. The truth was, she hadn't done anything that warranted such hostility from the board. Her biggest fault had been her directness in breaking the news. And she had asked for a private conversation. "I should have been kinder," Ronan admitted to himself. Samuel wasn't the only one in the wrong. Charlotte had come to share something deeply personal, and he had let her down with his reaction. "I'll call her later. I'll make things right." Patricia looked up from her laptop. "I have something," she announced. "Let me see," Samuel said. Ronan narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean by that?" Patricia passed her laptop over. "I drafted a press release." "We're not putting out a press release," Ronan said firmly. Patricia sighed. "Of course we're not planning to release it. But if Charlotte goes public with this, we need to be ready with a response." "That won't happen," Ronan said. "Can you guarantee that?" Ryan asked. He looked sympathetic, but his tone told Ronan he wasn't entirely on his side. "How well do you really know her? You two aren't in a relationship, are you?" "No, we're not," Ronan admitted. Ryan raised a brow. "And how long have you known her?" "Not long," Ronan confessed. Ryan shrugged. "Then you have to consider the possibility that you don't know her as well as you think. People can surprise you. We need to be prepared." Samuel skimmed the document and nodded. "This is solid, but we should add a line about why Ronan stopped taking Androsyl. It interacts with certain allergy medications, right? That should be the official reason. Otherwise, people might think he stopped due to side effects." Ronan frowned. "I never stopped using Androsyl." "What are you even writing in there?" "That's not true." Samuel shot him a sharp look. "Think, Ronan. We can't have a scandal where the CEO of this company fathered a child while using the very contraceptive drug we're about to launch." Ronan exhaled slowly, his frustration mounting. "Then we don't release it. We pull it back and conduct further testing. Clearly, it's not ready." Samuel scoffed. "We've done enough testing. It's ready for the market." Ronan's voice hardened. "If something like this happened, then we obviously haven't done enough testing." He looked around. "We can't launch a flawed product. You all must realize that." Samuel's expression was unreadable. "The board has already voted." "When?" Ronan demanded. "I wasn't part of that vote." Ryan sighed. "Samuel, just tell him. There's no point hiding it anymore." He turned to Ronan. "Androsyl doesn't have the 100% effectiveness rate we hoped for." Ronan stared. "You knew this?" Ryan nodded. Yours isn't the first unexpected pregnancy. Ronan felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. But there were only 20 people in the initial test group, including me. If 2 cases occurred, that means it's, at best, 90% effective. Ryan hesitated. Actually, there were 3. Ronan could barely process the words. And you still want to launch this? Samuel's voice was firm. No form of birth control is 100% effective. But most are better than 85%. Ronan protested. What's your plan when customers start reporting failures? Patricia leaned forward. Some failures can be attributed to user error. Ronan couldn't believe what he was hearing. So your strategy is to release a faulty product and blame the customers when it doesn't work? That's completely unethical. We consulted with legal, Samuel said. The company isn't breaking any laws. Ronan clenched his fists. Oh, as long as the company's safe, right? His gaze swept over the room. You all knew about this for a while, didn't you? The information didn't come all at once, Ryan said. The first case was 4 months ago. And no one told me? Patricia gave him a tight-lipped look. It was decided that keeping you out of it was the best course of action. Ronan anger flared. You had no right to keep that from me. I'm the CEO. We were protecting you, Samuel said coolly. You worry too much about ethics. If you'd known, you would have delayed the launch indefinitely. This decision had to be made without your interference. Ronan was furious. If I had known, I would have sent the drug back for additional testing 4 months ago. Samuel folded his arms. And you never would have approved it. It would never reach the market if left to you. Ronan exhaled sharply. Drugs should be as safe as possible before release. That should be common sense. Ryan softened his tone. Ronan, you have to admit, if the test results mattered so much to you, you could have followed up yourself. Ronan said nothing. Ryan was right. He should have been more involved. Instead, he had trusted the board to handle things responsibly. Ronan shook his head. You all knew I was in the trial. Didn't that make you think I deserved to know? Samuel was unfazed. You weren't in a committed relationship. Statistically, your chances of avoiding pregnancy were already high. Ronan clenched his jaw. And how do you feel about that assumption now? Patricia cleared her throat. We need to focus on what happens next. Charlotte isn't going to talk, Ronan insisted. I'm more worried about you, Patricia said. Unlike the other test subjects, you didn't sign a non-disclosure agreement. And you publicly stated that you were taking androsyl in an interview. Ronan glanced at the screen as she pulled up the article. If this pregnancy becomes public, Ryan added, people will quickly connect the dots. Then release the statement, Ronan said. You already wrote a cover story. Send it out. Ryan sighed. It won't be that simple. Our competitors will investigate. They'll pressure reporters. Your life will be scrutinized. Samuel leaned forward. We can still salvage this if you never acknowledge the child. Ronan's stomach twisted. You can't ask me to deny my own child. Samuel's voice was cold. Then take a leave of absence. Ronan stared. You can't force me out. Samuel smirked. By majority vote, we can. All in favor? One by one, the hands rose. Samuel met his gaze. Let us know when you decide the company matters more than her. That couldn't have been more disastrous. Thankfully, Charlotte hadn't told her parents about her plans for today. At least she wouldn't have to endure their questions about how it had gone. She greeted her mother with a quick nod as she passed through the kitchen, where she was busy washing dishes, and hurried to the sanctuary of her bedroom. She needed time to process everything. Ronan knows the truth now. That's something, at least. But was it really? Before today, she had been able to convince herself that if only she could reach him, he would have been there for her. She had imagined him accompanying her to doctor's appointments, helping her pick a name for the baby, discussing co-parenting with warmth and understanding. Maybe even planning future family trips together. They had no animosity between them. Why shouldn't they be able to find a way to make it work? Now, after the way he had dismissed her from his office, all of that felt like a foolish dream. And the humiliation still burned. The way those board members had spoken to her. It had nearly turned into outright mockery. She knew exactly what they thought, that she was some scheming opportunist trying to trap their CEO with a pregnancy. I didn't even know he was a CEO. She thought bitterly, pounding her pillow into a better shape. It's not my fault he's wealthy. His money meant nothing to her. But his influence, that was another matter. How did someone so young hold so much power? The realization unsettled her. And what did he really think of her? He hadn't joined in their attacks. He had even tried to stop them. But he hadn't exactly defended her either. All she could do now was wait for his call. If he even calls. He had said he would, but there had been no warmth in his voice. He had told her he needed time to process, to think. What was there to think about? She hadn't asked him for anything. I don't really know him, do I? As wonderful as their night together in Rome had been, it had existed in a bubble, a fleeting moment disconnected from reality. To believe she knew Ronan based on that experience alone had been naive. Maybe he wasn't the caring, considerate person she had imagined him to be. Maybe he had just wanted to get rid of her today, to put the whole thing behind him. Maybe he had no intention of ever reaching out again. The thought left her feeling hollow. She had been prepared to raise this child alone. That had never frightened her. But now, knowing how close she had come to giving her baby a father, the loss of that possibility hurt more than she could have expected. But I won't chase him. She knew where he worked. She had his number. But she wouldn't use it. She wouldn't try to force her way into his life. And she would never again allow herself to be humiliated the way she had been today. Days passed. Ronan never called. Charlotte's parents had noticed something was off. "Do you think we should call the doctor, sweetheart?" her mother asked worriedly over dinner one evening. "If you're feeling down, we shouldn't ignore that." "I'm not depressed," Charlotte insisted, though she knew she didn't sound convincing. She had been sluggish and withdrawn for days. "Pregnancy hormones can do all sorts of things," her mother said gently. "It's nothing to be ashamed of." "I know," Charlotte replied. "And I'm not ashamed. I'm not even depressed. Just sad." Her mother pushed her plate toward her. "Try to eat something." Charlotte nodded. She hadn't been eating much lately, but she understood the importance of staying healthy for the baby. Taking a deep breath, she took a bite of chicken. The moment she felt it was safe to slip away, she excused herself and retreated to her bedroom. Lately, she had fallen into the habit of searching for Ronan's name online. It wasn't the best idea, but it kept her from picking up the phone to call him. For days, nothing new had surfaced. There were standard articles outlining his career and praising his leadership at Synthogen. A few interviews where he spoke about the company's latest innovations. Usually, she just skimmed through them, then switched to image searches to look at his face, strictly to imagine what their child might look like. At least, that's what she told herself. But today, something was different. A cluster of new articles had appeared. Articles she hadn't seen before. Synthogen CEO returns home under fire. A dramatic headline if there ever was one. And yet, it worked. She clicked. The first image in the article showed Ronan at an airport, shielding his face from cameras. She would have recognized him anywhere. Her heart pounded unexpectedly. Whatever this is, it's bad, she thought. Despite everything, she didn't want him to be in trouble. Whatever had happened, he didn't deserve this. Dreading what she was about to read, she scrolled down. Ronan Lancaster, CEO of Synthogen Pharmaceuticals, returned earlier than scheduled from what was meant to be a routine visit to the company's San Antonio branch. Sources say his trip was supposed to last until tomorrow. Could his sudden departure signal an internal shakeup? Charlotte felt a wave of shock. Could he have lost his job? She went back to the search results, clicking on another article. This one had no invasive paparazzi shots, just a professional photo of Ronan at a business conference, smiling confidently. Clearly, an old image pulled from archives. Synthogen Pharmaceuticals' young CEO Ronan Lancaster has been placed on an unexpected leave of absence by the board of directors. But why? Some insiders speculated it had to do with financial losses, while others whispered about internal conflicts. But one particular theory stopped Charlotte cold. Some sources believe this could be linked to a recent failure in the company's product line. Her stomach twisted. Of course. The product didn't work. She had unknowingly exposed that fact when she had confronted Ronan at his office. No wonder he was upset. No wonder he was angry. Yes, she had asked to speak with him privately, but maybe she should have tried harder. Maybe she should have waited until after work or found another way to break the news. Instead, she had been so determined to tell him that she had walked right in and said it in front of everyone. And she should have realized the consequences. She had known what kind of company he worked for. She had even mentioned their latest development in her interview with Madeline Moss. She couldn't claim ignorance now. And she had known Ronan had used that product. She just hadn't thought about what it might mean if it failed. She had only been focused on telling him the truth. No, she corrected herself. I was thinking about the baby. This isn't about me. It never was. That was true, but it didn't make her feel any better. The fact remained, her actions had cost Ronan his career. For now, the media didn't seem to know the real reason behind his departure. But that didn't make her feel any less responsible. She clicked on article after article, unable to stop herself, and the rumors only grew worse. Some speculated he had been involved in financial misconduct, embezzlement, insider trading. Others hinted at deeper scandals, suggesting Synthogen was eager to distance itself from him before something serious came to light. Charlotte shut those articles as fast as she opened them, turning away from the screen so she wouldn't have to read such cruel words. With a shaky breath, she slammed the laptop shut and pushed it away. Tears stung her eyes as she sank back against her pillows. How did it come to this? How did my actions cause so much damage? I should have left it alone. I should have just walked away. But could she have? Once she had found out where he was, didn't she have a duty to tell him the truth? Didn't her child deserve to know its father? Didn't Ronan deserve to know about his child? She pressed her palms against her face, breathing deeply to control her emotions. She didn't want to lie here crying over Ronan. What was done was done. She couldn't change it now. When she had calmed slightly, she got up and went to the bathroom. Standing in front of the mirror, she studied her reflection. Was it her imagination, or did her face look a little softer, rounder than before? She pulled off her shirt, turning to the side. She tried to limit these check-ins to twice a week, knowing that if she looked too often, she wouldn't notice the changes. But today she was certain. Her belly had grown. She ran her hand over her stomach, lingering there, pretending that somehow her baby could sense her presence, that it knew she was here. "It's all right," she whispered. "We'll be just fine. You and me. We'll figure it out." Because now, she knew for sure Ronan wasn't going to call. Not after what had happened. He was probably too furious to even think about speaking to her. And even if he wasn't, with the media watching his every move, he couldn't risk reaching out. He had too much at stake. Maybe it's better this way. In all the scenarios she had imagined, all the daydreams about him, she had pictured the man she met in Rome, the one who had been warm and full of life. But the Ronan she had seen at Synthogen had been distant, unyielding, almost cold. He had been nothing like the person she had imagined co-parenting with. She felt sorry for what had happened to him. She truly did. And if she ever got the chance, she would apologize. But she and her baby would be okay. Returning to her room, she reopened her laptop and closed every article without hesitation. Then she turned on soft music and curled up with a book. But she couldn't concentrate. No matter how much she tried to move forward, she couldn't shake the thoughts of Ronan. He was back in Boston now. She knew. Maybe he was meeting with his legal team, trying to negotiate his way back into Synthogen. Maybe he had already given up and was contemplating his next step. At that thought, an unexpected flicker of hope surfaced. If he was leaving the company for good, there would be no more professional risks. Nothing stopping him from being a father. She didn't want to let herself hope. He hadn't called. He hadn't given any indication that he planned to. Unless he's waiting. Maybe he needed to fix things first. Maybe he was waiting for the chaos to settle before reaching out. Maybe. Charlotte had no idea what to expect anymore. All she could do was brace herself for whatever came next. Ronan was jolted awake by the relentless pounding on his front door. Groaning, he yanked a pillow over his head. This had been his reality since landing in Boston, reporters trailing him from the airport all the way home. Now, they were camping outside, desperate for a quote, a comment, anything. The knocking turned into the persistent chime of the doorbell. He regretted ever having it installed. How the hell did they get inside? He thought irritably. Isn't that what the doorman is for? But money could make people forget their duties. Someone had probably slipped the guy a hefty tip to look the other way while they slipped in. Ronan considered paying him off himself to ensure this never happened again. "Mr. Lancaster?" a muffled voice called. "We know you're in there. Just a few questions. We're with the Boston Star. Never heard of it." Sounded like some second-rate paper trying to make a name by uncovering whatever scandal they thought he was hiding. He considered just lying there, waiting them out, but he knew from experience they wouldn't leave easily. For 3 days, he had been a prisoner in his own home. Going outside was out of the question. Even ordering food had been risky. He had made that mistake on the first night, opening the door to what he thought was a delivery driver, only to have a camera flash in his face. Now, he only accepted deliveries left at his doorstep. He would wait, watching through the peephole, ensuring the coast was clear before grabbing his food. This was not how he wanted to live. Eventually, the knocking ceased. Ronan sighed and pulled himself out of bed. As he moved through his apartment, he flipped on lights, careful to keep the curtains drawn. He wasn't taking any chances, not when some reporter could easily send up a drone to spy on him. Reluctantly, he reached for his phone. He didn't want to see what was being said about him, but he had to stay informed. It was better to find out in private than to be blindsided later. His morning routine had become predictable. Coffee, then a search for his own name. Several new articles had surfaced overnight. He skimmed through them, scanning for Charlotte's name or any mention of a pregnancy. Nothing. Just speculation, though it was growing more ridiculous by the day. One article suggested he had been a corporate spy all along. Ronan rolled his eyes. Really? He had a long documented history with Synthogen, but apparently, facts didn't matter. Worse, other commenters agreed with the theory, debating which rival company he might have been working for. If those companies monitored mentions of their names online, and they almost certainly did this, nonsense could land him in another mess. Samuel was probably loving this. Ronan could already picture him gloating about how wise he had been to put him on leave. Another commenter suggested he was dealing with some personal issue that could tarnish his reputation. That one hit uncomfortably close to home. His stomach tightened. Was there a chance someone actually knew about Charlotte's pregnancy? No, that didn't add up. The leak that tipped reporters off about his flight home had to have come from inside the company. But this comment? It wasn't from a journalist. It was just a random reader. If anyone had real information, they would sell it, not hint at it in an article's comment section. Still, the possibility that someone could dig too deep unnerved him. No one will find out. Not unless someone talks. His board wouldn't. They wanted this buried. And Charlotte? He hadn't known her long, but his instincts told him she wouldn't betray his trust. That left one wild card, someone in her life looking to cash in. Frowning, he pulled out his phone, Charlotte's number glowing on the screen. Then, he hesitated. What was he thinking? Calling her just to warn her to keep quiet? The last time they had spoken, he had been escorting her out of his office. He had promised to call so they could talk properly. And then he'd left San Antonio and hadn't. At first, he told himself he was going to. But then the media frenzy took over, and if he was honest, he had avoided thinking about her pregnancy altogether. But sitting alone in his kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, he knew that wasn't the truth. He'd had plenty of time to think. He just hadn't wanted to. Now, he was considering calling her out of the blue not to discuss their future, but because he had no one else to talk to. If she hung up on him, he would deserve it. The problem was, there was no one else. Ronan had plenty of acquaintances, but no true friends. Most of the people he spent time with were connected to work. They weren't an option. And his family? He scoffed. What would it be like to have parents who supported you? Who rallied around you when things got tough? If he had that kind of family, he could call them right now. They would laugh off the articles, crack jokes, remind him that no one with a brain would believe such absurd theories. But his family wasn't like that. His father had been calling relentlessly since he got back. Ronan hadn't answered once, and he wasn't about to start now. He knew exactly what those calls would be: demands for an explanation, judgment, and pressure to fix things. His father would likely have pushed for the company to release the drug despite the flaw. Ronan couldn't do that. The thought of those who had trusted Synthogen trusted him only to face unplanned pregnancies made him sick. I believed in it too. That was why he had been willing to use androsyl himself. But it hadn't been ready. Charlotte, at least, seemed happy about her pregnancy. That was the only small relief in all of this. It's me she's not happy about. Ronan sighed, rubbing his forehead. He needed to call her. But not out of nowhere. Not after days of silence. A call would feel too sudden, too confrontational. If she was upset, she might not even answer. And honestly, he wouldn't blame her. But a text? That felt more manageable. Pulling up her contact, he hesitated only briefly before typing, "Hi, Charlotte. I'm sorry it's taken me this long to reach out. I won't make excuses. I should have contacted you sooner, and I regret that. I'd really like to talk if you're open to it. There's a lot we need to discuss. Please let me know when you'd be comfortable speaking. I'll respect your wishes if you don't want to, but I'd really like the chance. Ronan." Signing his name felt formal, but maybe that was appropriate. Now, all he could do was wait. How many times have you read that text now? Charlotte glanced up from her phone, meeting her mother's gaze half exasperated, half sympathetic. Aren't you going to reply? Victoria asked, arms crossed. The message had been sitting in her inbox since the day before. She had initially planned to keep her disastrous encounter with Ronan to herself, but that plan had crumbled the moment she saw the text. She had confided in her parents, sharing every detail and showing them his message. Her father's reaction had been immediate. He had his chance, he'd said firmly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. And now, after everything, he thinks he can just walk back into your life? Absolutely not. Her mother, however, had taken a more understanding approach. It's not just about you anymore, honey, she'd reminded her, gently. You need to think about what's best for your baby, too. Despite their differing views, both of her parents had reassured her that they would stand by her decision. That support was comforting, but it didn't mean her mother was going to let the topic drop. I'm still figuring out what I want to say, Charlotte replied. Besides, he took his time getting back to me. I don't mind making him wait a little. You don't want to be petty, her mother warned. Be the bigger person for your baby's sake. Charlotte nodded, though deep down, she felt justified in making Ronan wonder if he had missed his chance. Her mother sat beside her at the table. Let's talk through it together, she suggested. What do you want to say to him? I don't know yet. Start with what you're feeling, her mother encouraged. Not if I don't want to push him away. She imagined sending a message laced with all the frustration and hurt she still carried. You're still upset, her mother observed. Wouldn't you be? Charlotte asked. I was willing to be flexible. If he wanted to see the baby once a year, I would have let him. If he wanted shared custody, I was open to discussing it. The only unacceptable response was shutting me out without a conversation. You did put him on the spot, her mother pointed out gently. Charlotte's eyes widened. You're not taking his side, are you? Of course not, her mother reassured her. I'll always be on your side. But I'm trying to help you understand his reaction. It wasn't right, but maybe it was human. I don't get it, Charlotte admitted. But you told me he lost his job because of what happened, her mother reminded her. You even said you felt guilty about that. Charlotte sighed. I do feel guilty, she admitted. But I'm still angry. Does that make me unreasonable? Not at all, her mother said. And maybe that's where you start. You could acknowledge how things unfolded but still express how much his actions hurt you. Can I do that? Charlotte hesitated. He's the one apologizing. That doesn't mean you have to forgive him instantly, her mother said. If he wants your forgiveness, he should earn it. But don't I owe the baby more than that? Charlotte asked. It will be better for the baby if you and Ronan have a healthy civil relationship, her mother said. That won't happen if you bury your feelings. You need to be honest and clear now. Charlotte sighed. I guess you're right. So, you'll text him back? Before she could answer, her phone buzzed in her hand. She looked down. Another message from Ronan. Hi, Charlotte. I'm not sure if you got my last text, but I really think we need to talk. I'm flying to San Antonio this afternoon, and I hope you'll agree to see me. Please let me know. Her heart pounded. He was coming here? What is it? Her mother asked. Wordlessly, Charlotte handed her the phone. He's coming to see you, her mother said. Charlotte shook her head. I doubt it's just for me. Of course it is, her mother said. You're carrying his child. And you said he's on leave from work, so it's not a business trip. That was true. Charlotte stared at the message. Are you going to meet him? Her mother asked. I suppose I should, Charlotte murmured. If he's coming all this way. You don't have to, her mother reminded her. But I think talking is the right thing to do. You don't want to hold on to anger forever. Charlotte nodded. You're right. What will you say? Charlotte stood. I think I'll text him privately first. I need to think this through. Her mother nodded. I'll be here if you want to talk afterward. She retreated to her room, phone in hand, feeling as if it weighed a ton. After several drafts, she finally typed, Hi. I'm free to meet tonight, if you want. She pressed send and set the phone down, stepping away before she could obsess over his reply. But the buzz came almost immediately. That sounds great. Can I take you out for dinner? She hesitated before replying. We can meet for dinner, yes. She wondered if he would catch the subtle difference. Back in Rome, when everything had been carefree and romantic, she had let him treat her to extravagant dinners. But now, she wasn't comfortable letting him pay. I can pick you up at 7. Just send me your address. Absolutely not. If he came to the house, her parents would insist on meeting him, and she wasn't ready for that. I'll meet you at the restaurant. Where do you want to go? His reply made her stomach sink. Rue des Fleurs? One of the most expensive restaurants in town. She had never been there, but she knew that a meal could cost hundreds. Could she justify spending that kind of money? But asking him to pick somewhere else might raise questions. After the accusations from his board about her being after his money, the last thing she wanted was to seem concerned about financial matters. That's fine. I'll meet you at 7. Then, before he could respond, she shoved her phone into her sock drawer. She didn't want to analyze his next message whether he responded enthusiastically or not at all. She walked back into the kitchen. Her father had joined her mother, and they both looked up expectantly. I'm meeting him tonight, she announced. We're having dinner. Her mother smiled. I think that's a good decision. Her father frowned, turning his coffee cup in his hands. I don't like the sound of this guy. He's the baby's father, her mother reminded him. That's no reason to meet with him if he's not a good person. Dad, Charlotte said. You promise to support me no matter what. His expression softened. Of course I do. I just don't want you getting hurt. Maybe this dinner will be a good thing, Charlotte said. If he's coming all the way from Boston, that has to mean something. Her mother nodded. He wouldn't travel all this way just to tell you he doesn't want to be involved. How would you feel if he wanted shared custody? Her father asked. Charlotte took a deep breath. If that's what he wants, I'd be okay with it. Her father sighed. Just make sure you know what you want from him before you go tonight. Charlotte nodded. Ideally, he'd move here. His company has an office in San Antonio. It would make things easier. You should ask him, her father said. Charlotte shook her head. I can't ask him to move, but I can hope he chooses to. Her mother frowned. At least discuss support with him. Charlotte thought of the harsh accusations from Ronan's board. She couldn't bring herself to ask him for anything. So she simply nodded. I'll talk to him, even if she knew she wouldn't. Charlotte had already arrived at the restaurant by the time Ronan walked in, but she hadn't secured a table yet. He found her lingering in the lobby, looking hesitant, as though she wasn't entirely sure she belonged there. Instantly, guilt settled in his chest. He was used to places like this, dining with colleagues, networking with investors, hosting corporate meetings. This was his world. But he should have realized Charlotte wouldn't feel the same way. The night hadn't even started, and he had already miscalculated. It's good to see you, he said, trying to ease the tension. Thank you for coming. Of course, she replied. I appreciate the chance to talk. Ronan approached the host's stand and requested a table for two. The host nodded and guided them to a private room at the back of the restaurant. I wasn't sure if we had a reservation, Charlotte said as she took a seat, Ronan politely holding the chair for her. She glanced around the quiet space. Are we the only ones in here? Ronan nodded. These rooms are reserved for executives' private business discussions, negotiations, things like that. Synthogen hosts clients and investors here often. Are you worried someone will see us? Charlotte asked. It wouldn't look good for you to be here with me, would it? Ronan sighed. We'll be fine. Even though I'm on leave, I still have access to the company's schedule. No one from work is supposed to be here tonight. Charlotte gave a small nod. I saw what they did to you, she said softly. Putting you on leave. That was because of me, wasn't it? No, he said, surprised. Of course not. Why would you think that? You told me I caused problems by telling you about the baby in front of everyone. And you were right. I should have handled it differently. You had no way of predicting the fallout, Ronan reassured her. Even I didn't see it coming. I was blindsided by the way my company reacted. I think they put me on leave just to ensure they could launch their new contraceptive without my interference. But the drug isn't reliable, Charlotte murmured, her expression troubled. It works 85% of the time, Ronan admitted. Which, by the way, they never told me. Charlotte, I'm sorry. You're in this situation because of my company's failure. She shook her head. Don't apologize. I'm not upset about it. Ronan blinked. You're not? I'm looking forward to this baby, she said, her voice steady. I was shocked at first, but now, I'm happy. So you don't need to feel guilty. Relief washed over him. I had a feeling that was the case, but I can't tell you how glad I am to hear you say it. Well, I'm just glad you don't have to stress about it anymore, Charlotte said. And for what it's worth, I am sorry. I should have made sure to talk to you privately before breaking the news. I should have listened when you asked to see me alone, Ronan admitted. I was harsh that day at the office. And I regret it. He noticed some of the tension fade from her face. She had been waiting for that apology. It was really your board, she said. They were ruthless. You were just distant. I shouldn't have been, Ronan said. And I should never have let them speak to you like that. I should have stopped it the moment I realized what was happening. I'm sorry I let it go on as long as I did. You were processing everything, Charlotte said. It makes sense. I was overwhelmed when I first found out too. I can't imagine how you handled it all alone, Ronan said. I'm sorry you had to. I haven't been alone, she corrected him. I've been staying with my parents. You have? Because of the pregnancy? I actually moved in the night I got back from Rome, she admitted. My apartment was broken into. What? And I'm between jobs, so they offered me a place to stay. Ronan exhaled sharply. You've been through a lot. Yeah, she said. But it's okay. My parents are thrilled about the baby. Ronan felt an unfamiliar weight lift from his chest. Charlotte was safe. The baby was safe. She had support, love, and security. That made the next part of the conversation a little easier. I'm glad you have them, he said. I came here to talk about what happens after the baby is born. She looked at him expectantly. Charlotte. He hesitated, forcing himself to continue. I can't be involved in the baby's life. She inhaled sharply. What? I've been thinking it over, he said carefully. There's no way it can work. If the press finds out, my career at Synthogen is over. The board won't allow me back if it becomes public knowledge that I fathered a child while being the face of their contraceptive. And there's no way to keep it a secret. Your career? She repeated, her voice sharper. Guilt twisted in his gut. I just lost my job, she reminded him. I had an interview at Synthogen, and I threw away my chance so I could tell you the truth. And now you're saying you can't be part of this child's life because of your career? It's different, he argued. How? Synthogen isn't just a job, he explained. I built it from nothing. It's like my child. But it's not a child, she shot back. Your child is a child. I've dedicated my whole life to this company, he said. I can't walk away from it. And I can't let one mistake destroy it. Mistake? I don't mean it like that, he said quickly. I'm happy for you. But we didn't plan this. She shook her head. How do you expect me to explain to this baby that their father chose a company over them? What would you think if your father had done that? The words hit him harder than he expected. He knew what that felt like. But at least his child wouldn't have to see it firsthand. He wouldn't be in their life enough for it to sting every day. I can't believe this, Charlotte whispered. I can't believe this is what you came all the way here to say. I'm sorry, he said, voice hollow. I know this is hard, but I'll provide for you and the baby. Her eyes blazed. I don't want your money. I know you're not asking for it, he said quickly. But children are expensive. You're not working right now. Let me help. Help? She said bitterly. You think handing me a check and walking away is helping? I'm not telling you to go away. That's exactly what you're doing, she snapped. Ronan sighed. For legal reasons. I need you to sign an NDA. Her face went pale. What? He placed a folded document on the table. It guarantees that you won't disclose the baby's paternity. She didn't move. Is that really necessary? You know the media is looking for anything on me, he said. The fewer people who know, the better. My parents already know, she said. That's fine. I just can't let it spread. She stared at him for a long moment before shaking her head. Do you have a pen? Wordlessly, he handed one over. She scanned the document, signed it, and pushed it back to him. Thank you, he said. Charlotte stood, her eyes glistening. I don't think I want to stay for dinner. He swallowed. Are you sure? I don't want your money. And I don't want your dinner. She turned and walked away without another word. Ronan sat motionless, regret coiling around him. He told himself he had made the right choice. So why did it feel so wrong? Over the next few days, Charlotte's frustration toward Ronan gradually faded. She had already prepared herself for the possibility that he might choose not to be a part of their child's life. What truly upset her was the notion that his company seemed to hold greater importance to him. But what did she really understand about running a business? He had invested over a decade of his life into it. Perhaps it was genuinely too difficult for him to step away. And it wasn't just about Ronan. Synthogen supported many employees whose livelihoods depended on its success. If he let the company collapse, it wouldn't only affect him. In a way, she could respect the decision he had made. A small part of her wanted to reach out and tell him that. She regretted how she had stormed out of the restaurant, letting her emotions take over. But she also knew she had to stop reaching out to him. He had made his choice, and now she had to move forward without him. She had shared a brief version of their conversation with her parents, who had offered their sympathy but didn't press her for details, sensing she wasn't ready to talk about it. Since that evening, they had gone out of their way to be extra kind to her. Today, her mother had offered to drive her to her doctor's appointment, and Charlotte had accepted. It would have been lonely to go to her first ultrasound alone. You're very quiet, her mother remarked as they pulled into the parking lot. I guess I'm a little nervous, Charlotte admitted. There's nothing to worry about, her mother reassured her. This is just a routine checkup. I know, Charlotte said. But I can't help wondering what if something is wrong with the baby. You've been taking care of yourself, haven't you? Eating well, taking your vitamins? Her mother gave her hand a squeeze. The baby is fine. Charlotte nodded, though the worry still lingered. She had never been responsible for something so precious before. What if she made a mistake? What if she failed to protect her child? I wonder if all single mothers feel this way, she mused. It's just me now. If anything goes wrong, it's on me. Her mother parked the car and turned to face her. Nothing is going to go wrong. she said firmly. And even if something did, it wouldn't be your fault. I've been watching you, Charlotte. You're taking care of yourself. You're doing everything right. Your father did the same for me when I was expecting you, and now we're both here for you. You're not alone in this. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. She leaned over and embraced her mother. Thanks, Mom. Victoria chuckled and patted her back. You've been so emotional lately. Maybe ask the doctor about that? You don't think it's normal? Charlotte teased. Oh, it's normal, her mother said with a knowing smile. But maybe the doctor can suggest some ways to help you relax. That would be nice, Charlotte admitted. Her emotions had been all over the place recently. Maybe that was part of the reason she had reacted so strongly during dinner with Ronan. They walked into the doctor's office, and Charlotte checked in at the reception desk before filling out some paperwork. While she worked through the forms, Victoria flipped through a cooking magazine. A few minutes later, the doctor, a petite woman with a sharp bob, called Charlotte's name. Would you like me to come with you? Her mother asked. Charlotte hesitated. Her mother hadn't accompanied her to a doctor's appointment since she was a child. But this felt like one of those moments where having someone by her side would be comforting. She smiled. I'd like that, Mom. Thanks. Ready to find out your due date? The doctor asked as Charlotte lay back on the exam table. Charlotte nodded. It'll be nice to have a timeline. I'm trying to plan things, buying baby essentials, setting up the nursery, finishing my pregnancy classes. And don't forget the baby shower, her mother added. Charlotte blushed. Mom, we're not doing a baby shower. Of course we are, Victoria said. This is something to celebrate. I know, Charlotte said. But won't it be awkward? People will ask about the father, and I won't know what to tell them. You do know what to tell them. Her mother took her hand as the doctor applied cool gel to Charlotte's belly. Tell them the truth. You met him while you were on vacation in Rome. You had a whirlwind romance. It's a lovely story. Charlotte exhaled, feeling relief wash over her. She hadn't realized how much she had been dreading that question. But her mother was right. There was a simple, beautiful answer. And I can tell the baby the same thing. The doctor murmured, her gaze fixed on the screen. Charlotte's stomach twisted. What's wrong? She asked, panic rising. Relax, the doctor said gently. Everything's fine. But it looks like you're expecting multiples. Multiples? Charlotte echoed. Triplets, the doctor said. I'm detecting 3 heartbeats. Charlotte's breath hitched. 3? A mix of awe and anxiety crashed over her. She had just begun to adjust to the idea of raising one baby alone. But 3? How could she possibly manage? Victoria turned to the doctor. Can we have a moment? Of course, the doctor said, stepping outside. As soon as the door closed, Charlotte turned to her mother, eyes wide. Mom, what am I going to do? 3 of them? You're going to be okay, Victoria said, squeezing her hand. Your father and I will help you. But I don't even have enough hands for 3 babies at once. Charlotte panicked. What if they all cry at the same time? What if I can't do this? There are 3 of us, her mother reminded her gently. We'll figure it out together. Charlotte shook her head. This just keeps getting harder and harder. Are you having second thoughts? Her mother asked, wrapping an arm around her. No, Charlotte said, surprising herself with how certain she was. It's going to be so difficult, but I don't regret it. They're mine, and I already love them. She looked at her mother. Is that crazy? Victoria smiled. Not at all. I loved you just as fast. I hope I can be as good a mom as you, Charlotte whispered. You will be. Charlotte rested a hand on her stomach. I'm going to be huge, aren't I? Her mother laughed. Maybe we should go shopping for maternity clothes after this. That sounds good, Charlotte said, smiling. And maybe we could get one of those milkshakes you love? Charlotte chuckled. That sounds even better. Thanks, Mom. Later that night, Charlotte sat on her bed, staring at her phone. She had told her mother she wouldn't contact Ronan, but a part of her wanted to. Not for money, never for money, but to share the news. To hear his reaction. Would he feel the same mixture of excitement and panic she felt? No, she reminded herself. They weren't his babies. Not in the ways that mattered. She powered off her phone and slid it under her pillow. She could do this. She had her parents. She had herself. That was all she needed. Running a hand over her belly, she whispered, We're going to be okay. The sharp buzz of his phone pulled Ronan from sleep. Groggily, he reached for the nightstand, rubbing his eyes as he swiped the screen. Yeah? His voice was thick with sleep as he pressed the phone to his ear. So this is what it takes to get you to answer? His father's stern voice rang through the line. Calling you in the dead of night? Ronan exhaled, shifting to a sitting position and resting his elbows on his knees. The heavy curtains kept the room cloaked in darkness, but he squinted at the clock just past 4 a.m. Dad, he muttered. You've been ignoring my calls. Figured if I caught you off guard, you'd have no choice but to pick up. Ronan felt a pang of guilt. He hadn't meant to shut his father out completely, but work had been a mess, and facing his family's judgment had been the last thing on his mind. Is something wrong? He asked. Something wrong? His father scoffed. Your mother has been beside herself. She hasn't been able to show her face. You could have at least thought about her in all this. Ronan frowned. Wait, what's going on? Is Mom sick? Sick with embarrassment, his father snapped. And so am I. Every day there's another article, another rumor. No one knows where you are, and speculation is running wild. We've been left completely in the dark. I'm at my apartment, Ronan replied, rubbing a hand over his face. This is an overreaction, don't you think? Overreaction? His father's voice rose. I read just yesterday that you embezzled from your own company. Tell me that isn't true. Of course it's not true, Ronan said, standing up and heading for the kitchen. If he was going to be up for a while, he might as well make coffee. You know me better than that. You really think I stole from Synthogen? At this point, I don't know what to think. His father's tone was razor sharp. The son I raised was dedicated to his company, disciplined. And yet here you are, forced out of your own business. Didn't I teach you to be mindful of your reputation? Yes, Ronan muttered, hyper aware of it. His father ignored the sarcasm. Exactly. And yet, you've managed to completely lose control of the situation. How did this happen, Ronan? You're assuming it was my fault? Ronan challenged. Companies don't put their COs on leave without cause, his father countered. So tell me the truth. Ronan sighed. You won't let this go, will you? Not a chance, his father said. Your mistakes are affecting this entire family. We deserve an explanation. It's because of a woman, Ronan admitted. A woman? Ronan gave the barest details how he had met her in Rome, how she was expecting his child, and how his disagreement with the board over Androsil had led to his forced leave. That was an incredibly foolish move, his father scoffed. Androsil has already been teased to the public. Competitors are aware. Do you think the board would allow you to send it back for more testing at this stage? If we release it now, we're deceiving people, Ronan argued. Synthogen isn't being honest about its real effectiveness. They're letting people think it's flawless when in reality, some of them will end up in situations they never intended. That's not your concern, his father said coldly. Your job is to make sure the company thrives. Clearly, you've forgotten that. Ronan clenched his jaw. I won't support pushing out a product that doesn't work as promised. The company should take the time to fix it. His father brushed his words aside. I want the name of this woman, he demanded. Ronan's brow furrowed. Why? I'm calling the family attorney the moment we hang up. I need to ensure the situation is handled properly, so she doesn't become a liability. She's already signed an NDA, Ronan said, his frustration mounting. She won't say anything. And if she does? She won't, Ronan insisted. His father exhaled sharply. You're too trusting. If she realizes she can manipulate you, she will. You don't even know her, Ronan shot back. She didn't ask for anything from me. I had to convince her to accept financial support. His father's voice dripped with skepticism. That's how she's playing it. Acting innocent now, so she can take you for everything later. A pause, then, did you even see a pregnancy test? Ronan's patience snapped. You can't be serious. And we need a paternity test, his father added. You're out of line, Ronan said. I'm not doing that. Fine. Then I'll handle it. Give me her name. No. Silence stretched between them. What did you just say? I said no, Ronan repeated, his pulse pounding. He had never stood up to his father like this before. His father's voice was tight. I want the name. I'm not giving it to you, Ronan said. She deserves her privacy. She hasn't done anything wrong, and I won't let you go after her. She's the reason you were put on leave. That's not her fault, Ronan countered. If she hadn't stormed into your office, making a scene. She wasn't making a scene, Ronan interjected. She had every right to tell me. And if our product had worked as advertised, she wouldn't be in this situation at all. If anyone has grounds for legal action, it's her. His father was silent for a moment. Then tell me you didn't say that to her. Ronan felt the weight of his father's disappointment before the words even came. If she sues, don't expect my help. Ronan's chest tightened. He had always known where his father's priorities lay, but hearing it said so plainly still hurt. I wouldn't expect it, he said quietly. His father huffed. I'll tell your mother you're not in jail, at least. If you come to your senses and decide to take action, let me know. That won't happen, Ronan said firmly. You never fail to disappoint me, his father said, then hung up. Ronan stared at the phone in his hand, the words lingering in his mind. All his life, he had known how to earn his father's approval. It had always been simple: build success, keep up appearances, maintain control. But now, for the first time, he questioned whether his father's respect was even worth having. He had spent his entire adulthood ensuring he wouldn't become the kind of man his father was. Yet, in handling Charlotte's pregnancy, he had done exactly that, putting business before what truly mattered. And for what? To please a man who would never be satisfied? No. That ends now. He picked up his phone and pulled up flight schedules. There was a flight to San Antonio in the morning. It wasn't soon enough, but it would have to do. But before he left, there was something else he had to do first. His eyes scanned Synthegen's internal schedule. There was a shareholder meeting in a few hours. Perfect. He still had his keycard. He still had a voice. And this time, he wouldn't let them silence him. Ronan booked his flight for the afternoon. When the meeting was over, he would be on his way to Charlotte. This time, he would make things right. He only hoped she would let him. Walking through the corridors of Synthegen after an extended leave felt almost surreal. Ronan couldn't shake the feeling that all eyes were on him. And why wouldn't they be? As CEO, he already attracted attention. But now, thanks to the controversy surrounding his absence, the stares held curiosity and judgment. Everyone must have been wondering why he had been sent away and, more importantly, why he was suddenly back. Reaching the conference room, he noticed the door was shut. The meeting had already started. But Ronan had no intention of being left out. He knocked once before pushing the door open without waiting for an invitation and stepped inside. Every board member turned to him, their expressions ranging from surprise to outright shock. A heavy silence hung in the room. Samuel Thornton was the first to recover. You're not supposed to be here, Ronan, he stated. You're still on leave. That means no attending shareholder meetings. Not anymore, Ronan said with confidence. That ends today. Samuel folded his arms. Oh, really? And who exactly gave that order? I did, Ronan replied, standing his ground. You don't have that authority, Patricia Grayson interjected. We put you on leave for the damage you were causing this company. You can't just decide to come back. The board has to approve it. She's right, Samuel agreed. Ryan Hendricks leaned forward. Hold on. We never actually discussed what the terms of Ronan's return should be. We suspended him indefinitely without outlining what it would take for him to come back. Samuel frowned. What's your point? My point is, that was a mistake on our part, Ryan said. We should have put conditions in place for his reinstatement. We need a plan. Ronan had a feeling he knew where this was headed, but he was willing to listen. His flight wasn't for a few more hours. Fair enough, he said. Tell me what you need from me in order for my return to be approved. The board members exchanged uncertain glances. For starters, we'd need a firm commitment from you to support Androsol when it goes to market, Ryan said. My biggest concern is that you'll try to undermine the product's success. That's all? Ronan asked. For me, yes, Ryan said. If you sign a document promising not to speak publicly against Androsil, I'd be willing to reinstate you. Ronan nodded. What about the rest of you? His gaze swept the room. Does Ryan's proposal satisfy everyone? No, Patricia said coldly. That's not enough. What's your plan regarding the woman carrying your child? Samuel nodded in agreement. That's the real problem. We cannot have a CEO who publicly endorsed Androsil, vouched for it in an interview, and then ended up fathering a child. It would completely discredit the drug. Patricia added, it would ruin more than just Androsil. It would call our entire company's credibility into question. People would see us as untrustworthy. Ronan sighed. He had expected this reaction. In addition to supporting Androsil, you'll need to cut ties with that woman and her child, Samuel said firmly. No involvement whatsoever. Perhaps we can draft a contract to that effect, Patricia suggested. You would need to guarantee that you'll never claim that child as yours. And you'll need to ensure that she receives no financial support from you, Samuel added. Nothing that connects you to her. That won't work, Ryan objected. She knows Ronan is the father. If he refuses to provide financial support, she could take him to court. That would bring everything into public view. Would she sign a non-disclosure agreement? Samuel asked. She already has, Ronan confirmed. Samuel seemed satisfied. Then we can resolve this with a one-time settlement. Our accountants can estimate a suitable amount. No, Patricia countered. No one from Synthogen can be involved. This stays in this room. If anyone outside this meeting finds out, it increases the risk of exposure. We still need to craft a believable story for the media, Ryan pointed out. Right now, the rumors about Ronan's leave of absence are getting out of hand. We need a version of events that will put an end to speculation and protect both his and the company's reputation. I don't care about his reputation, Patricia scoffed. But you care about Synthogen's, don't you? Ryan asked. Because right now, the narrative suggests our CEO has been involved in embezzlement. That's far worse. Samuel nodded. We need a controlled narrative. One that works for everyone. Ronan will have to agree to it. So, he'll sign off on a statement supporting the official story of his leave. Sever all ties with that woman and child, and pledge full support to Andrusel? Patricia let out a humorless laugh. You're all delusional if you think he'll agree to that. He will, Ryan countered. Because that's the price of coming back. Ronan shook his head. For once, Patricia is right, he said. I won't be signing any of those documents. The room fell silent. Ryan exhaled slowly. I get that you might hesitate to put your personal affairs in writing, but you have to understand our priority is the company. You built this business. We're just trying to protect it. I understand, Ryan, Ronan said. But there's a difference between a company and a real, living child. You can't seriously be planning to acknowledge that baby as yours, Samuel said. It will ruin everything. Maybe not, Ronan said. There's another option, one that involves actually ensuring Androsel does what it's supposed to do. We could delay the release and fix the issues before launching. That's not happening, Samuel snapped. You've been told before, we're not reconsidering that. Ronan shrugged. I can't force you. No, Samuel said smugly. You can't. But you realize that the moment I go public about my child, people will ask questions, Ronan continued. They'll wonder how it happened. We can say he stopped taking Androsel, Patricia suggested. We already planned to say he was on allergy medication. Will that work? Ryan asked. It will if Ronan supports the story, Patricia said, fixing him with a pointed look. Will you? So that's the new offer? Ronan asked. I can return if I pretend I stopped taking Androsel? Samuel hesitated. It's the best compromise. Ronan had expected more resistance. They had caved so easily, and it made him realize something he had been willing to let Charlotte and their child go without a fight. Would this have been all it took for them to accept his choice? Maybe. For a moment, he considered accepting. He could have it all, his family, his company. But that was his father's mistake. No, Ronan said. I won't do it. You're willing to destroy this company? Samuel fumed. Of course not, Ronan said. But ignoring the problem won't make it disappear. If we release a flawed product, people will find out. What do you think happens then? We'll deal with that when it comes, Samuel insisted. Ronan sighed. Or we could fix the problem now and protect the company's reputation long term. We'd lose millions this quarter, Patricia argued. Ronan shook his head. For the first time in the company's history? So what? We'd recover by next quarter. Can't any of you think beyond short-term profits? Samuel's jaw tightened. I move to extend Ronan's leave. Patricia raised her hand in agreement. Ronan sighed. You don't need to vote. I'm not staying. Samuel scoffed. You think you'll get another job after this scandal? I'll find my way, Ronan said. But that's no longer your concern. He stood. If you'll excuse me, I have a flight to catch. I have somewhere far more important to be. As he left, the murmurs behind him faded. His priorities were no longer in this room. They were waiting for him in San Antonio. Ronan stood outside Charlotte's parents' home, inhaling deeply to steady himself. Getting this address hadn't been easy. Madeline Moss from the San Antonio branch of Synthogen had unknowingly helped him. She hadn't heard the news of his resignation yet, and, luckily, still had Charlotte's sum. Ronan knew that obtaining her information this way wasn't exactly ethical, but after everything Charlotte had been through, he felt she deserved an in-person conversation. Holding tightly onto the bouquet of roses he'd picked up, he pressed the doorbell. I just hope she doesn't shut the door in my face. Footsteps sounded from inside, followed by her familiar voice. I've got it, Dad. The door swung open, and there she was. For a long moment, he simply took her in. There was the slightest change in her appearance, the first signs beginning to show. Dressed in flannel pants and a tank top, her dark hair gathered in a loose bun, she looked as effortlessly beautiful as ever. Hey, he finally said. Charlotte's expression was unreadable, part shock, part something he couldn't quite place. He knew she hadn't expected to see him again. "Who is it?" a voice called from inside. Moments later, a man stepped into the hallway. Charlotte glanced over her shoulder before turning back. "Dad, this is Ronan Lancaster." Her father's face darkened slightly. "I'll get your mother," he said curtly before disappearing. "Can I come in?" Ronan asked hesitantly. She hesitated, then stepped aside, allowing him in. He held out the roses. "These are for you." She took them with a polite nod. "Thank you." Her tone was neutral. "You can come into the kitchen." Following her inside, Ronan took a seat at the table as Charlotte found a vase, filled it with water, and began trimming the stems without meeting his gaze. Clearing his throat, he said, "I was hoping we could talk." "I'm not sure there's anything left to say," she replied, arranging the flowers. "I think we covered everything at the restaurant." "You're upset," Ronan observed. "I'm really not." This time, she did meet his eyes, and he saw the sincerity in them. "I was angry at first. But now? I think I'm just sad. Because you wanted someone by your side through this," he said gently. "You didn't want to do it alone, and I—" "No," she interrupted. "I'm not alone. I have my parents. I'm making friends in my birthing classes." "You're taking birthing classes?" "Of course," she said. "I want to be prepared." "That's good." She hesitated, then spoke again. "It's just that people ask me about the father, and it makes me think about what it would have been like to grow up without mine. It would have been fine, my mom's incredible, but I would have missed a lot." Ronan nodded. "I get it. I didn't have much of a father figure either. He was around, but his business was always more important than his family." Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "I see the irony," he admitted. "That's part of why I'm here." Her voice was cautious. "Why are you here, Ronan?" "Because I made a terrible mistake." His voice was firm, unwavering. "I chose my company over something that truly mattered. I realize now how wrong I was. I want a chance to make things right." She studied him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I want to be involved in your life. In our child's life. I know I failed you, Charlotte. I let you down. But I'm asking you to give me another chance." Charlotte exhaled shakily and shut her eyes for a moment. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again," she admitted. "When I walked out of that restaurant, I thought that was it." "I thought so too," he said. "I regretted it almost immediately," she whispered. "I shouldn't have reacted the way I did." "I understand why you did," Ronan said. "You had every right to be upset." She shook her head. "Maybe. But your decision made sense. Your company, of course, it mattered to you. I should have been more understanding of that." "I quit," he told her. She set the vase down abruptly. "You what?" "I resigned," he said. "After the way they treated you and the way they continue to push Androssel, even though it's not ready, it's not something I can support anymore." "Oh, Ronan," she murmured. "I never would have asked you to do that." "I know," he said softly. "You never ask me for anything. But that's something we need to change." "We?" "If I'm going to be in the baby's life, I'm going to be in your life," he said. "That means I need you to be able to ask me for anything support. Help. Whatever you need." She pulled out a chair and sat beside him. "Truthfully, I wanted to call you." "About the pregnancy?" She nodded. "But I told myself I had to handle things on my own. I didn't want to rely on you." "I want you to rely on me," he said. Then her words fully registered. His heart skipped. "Wait. Did something happen? Is everything okay? Is the baby?" "The babies are fine," she said, placing her hands flat on the table. Ronan froze. "Babies?" She swallowed. "It's triplets. Triplets." The weight of the revelation settled over him. He could have asked why she hadn't told him sooner, but he already knew the answer. He had given her no reason to trust him. But she was trusting him now. "Triplets," he said, testing the word aloud. She watched him warily. "Is that too much?" "I think it's amazing." Her face brightened. "Really? I always wanted siblings," he admitted. "Our kids will have that bond from day one." "What could be better?" Her smile was the biggest he'd seen in months. "Oh, Ronan, that means so much to me." He barely had time to react before she wrapped her arms around him. He held her close, inhaling her familiar scent, grounding himself in the moment. "Take it slow, Ronan." He had just stepped back into her life. Now wasn't the time to start hoping for more. Then again, none of this had happened at the right time, yet they were making it work. A voice interrupted them. "Charlotte." She pulled back quickly. Mom. Dad. Her parents stood in the doorway, her mother looking curiously at them while her father remained unreadable. We're sorry to interrupt, her mother said. It's okay, Charlotte assured them. Mom, Dad, this is Ronan. Ronan stood, extending his hand. It's a pleasure to meet you both. They shook it, her father more hesitantly. Leonard nodded toward the kitchen. Why don't we put some coffee on? You were eavesdropping, weren't you? Charlotte sighed. Yes, her father said. And I have questions. Ronan met his gaze. That's fair. Charlotte's parents took their seats, and she went to prepare the coffee. Ronan exhaled. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, he knew where he belonged. Here. With them. With her. 6 months later. Charlotte's little miracles, 2 boys and a girl, arrived on a mild Saturday afternoon in the heart of winter. As she lay in her hospital bed, she cradled her firstborn son in her arms, watching him as he peacefully slept. They were perfect, she thought. Small, yet the doctors had reassured her and Ronan that their weight was just right. Considering there were 3 of them. Exhausted from labor, Charlotte had slept for several hours. Now, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, she felt fully awake, as though she would never want to sleep again. She wanted to cherish every single moment with her newborns. Ronan had reassured her that nothing significant had happened while she was asleep. They did a lot of sleeping too, he had said with a smile. It was a big day for them. At the moment, Ronan was catching up on some rest. They had decided on Italian names for the babies, a tribute to the place where they had been conceived: Riccardo, Camilla, and Enzo. Charlotte gently traced her thumb over Riccardo's soft, round cheek. You're perfect, she whispered. Never let anyone tell you otherwise, okay? Riccardo let out a soft coo in response. By the window, Ronan stirred slightly. Charlotte glanced over, watching to see if he would wake up, but he simply shifted into a new position and continued sleeping. She had told him he didn't have to stay, that he could go home if he wanted, that he must be exhausted, after staying by her side through the entire night of labor and delivery. But he had refused to leave, and secretly, she had been grateful. In fact, he hadn't left her side for the past 3 months. It was incredible. She had always known her parents would be there for her during the pregnancy, and they had been. But having Ronan had been different. It was more than she had ever dared to hope for. As she had entered her 6th month of pregnancy, Ronan had moved her into the new house he had bought just outside of town. Charlotte had expected her parents to object, but, as always, they had been supportive. The house had an entire wing just for her own bedroom, a luxurious bathroom with a clawfoot tub, and even a spare room Ronan had encouraged her to turn into an office or a library, whatever she desired. But it hadn't taken long before Charlotte found herself spending more time in Ronan's part of the house rather than her own. They had begun sharing meals, lounging on the couch together, and eventually sharing a bed. Without formally discussing it, they had naturally fallen into a relationship. And Charlotte knew, without a doubt, that Ronan felt the same way about her. Ronan stirred again, this time sitting up and blinking. You doing okay? He asked. She nodded. Can you take Riccardo? I think he's drifting off. Do you want another one? He asked, carefully lifting Riccardo from her arms and placing him in the crib. Camilla's awake. Yes, let me hold her. Charlotte reached out. I feel like I need to track how much time I spend with each of them, so I don't accidentally favor one over the others. Ronan chuckled. It'll even out over time. Don't worry. Charlotte took Camilla into her arms, cuddling her close. She has so much hair, she murmured in awe. She looks like you, doesn't she? I honestly don't know, Ronan admitted. I've never seen a baby picture of myself. Never? Charlotte asked, surprised. I don't think my parents kept any, Ronan said. I'm not even sure if they ever took any. That's so sad. Well, that's one mistake we won't make, Ronan said, holding up his phone. Smile for the camera, ladies. Cheese, Charlotte said happily. Ronan snapped the picture, but then his expression changed. Hang on, he said. I just got an email. Work? Charlotte asked. No, they know I'm on paternity leave, Ronan replied. They wouldn't bother me. A grin spread across his face. It's nice to finally work for a company that respects personal time. I believe it, Charlotte said sincerely. Ronan checked his email and let out a short, dry laugh. Oh wow, he said. What is it? Charlotte asked. It's from my father. Did you tell him about the babies? I did, Ronan said. But that's not what he's writing about. He emailed to let me know that Synthogen just declared bankruptcy. Seriously? Charlotte asked. That's what he wants to talk about today? Ronan sighed. You know how he is. Nothing is more important to him than business. But you weren't responsible for Synthegen's failure, Charlotte pointed out. If they went bankrupt, it's because of those lawsuits over that contraceptive. And you were the one who warned them not to rush it to market. Yeah, I was, Ronan agreed. But I was also the one who publicly admitted that my kids were conceived while using it. That made sales plummet. Maybe they could have afforded the settlements if the product had sold as expected. I think that was the plan all along. You don't feel bad for them, do you? Charlotte asked. No, Ronan assured her. They got what they deserved. I'm just relieved that the people affected by it received compensation. And I'm glad I left Synthegen before I got tangled up in this mess. He shook his head. I don't know how those people sleep at night. Is your father mad at you? Charlotte asked. Of course, Ronan said, slipping his phone into his pocket. But I don't care. If he isn't interested in our children, he has nothing to say that matters today. A few days later, Charlotte and the babies were finally cleared to leave the hospital. Nervous? She asked Ronan as they carefully secured Ricardo, Camila, and Enzo into the car seats they had picked out weeks earlier. Terrified, Ronan admitted. At least these car seats are the best ones out there, Charlotte said. I don't know what I would have done if I had to get the budget versions. You wouldn't have had to, Ronan assured her. I always planned to get whatever the babies needed, even if you had decided you never wanted to see me again. I know, Charlotte said. I was being stubborn about not accepting your help. Looking back, I don't know what I was thinking. You wanted to prove you could do this on your own, Ronan said. I get it. I feel the same way about accepting help from my father. Charlotte nodded, then wrapped her arms around him. He kissed the top of her head gently. Just drive slow, okay? She murmured. You got it. When they arrived home, Ronan carried the boys while Charlotte held Camila. The nursery was a grand, spacious room, more than enough for the triplets as they grew. They placed the babies in their cribs and stood together, arms wrapped around each other. They're perfect, Charlotte whispered. Everything is perfect, Ronan agreed. As he went to bring in the rest of their things, Charlotte rocked Enzo in her arms, staring out at the vast yard beyond the window. I'll have to set some boundaries, she mused aloud. I can't handle not knowing where they are. She laughed at herself, remembering her mother's words. It'll feel like losing a part of yourself at first. Looking at her son, she couldn't imagine ever letting him go. But for now, she had time. And that was all she needed. 2 years later. Mama. Charlotte turned carefully, mindful of the layers of her wedding gown. The fabric twisted around her ankles again, and she sighed, knowing this dress was more difficult to maneuver in than she'd expected. Her mother had already helped untangle it several times. Before she could fix it again, Camila ran toward her, and Charlotte caught her in her arms with a gentle laugh. What are you doing here, sweetheart? She asked, lifting her daughter and balancing her carefully so as not to wrinkle either of their dresses. I thought you were with your brothers, getting ready for the big moment. Camila giggled, pressing a soft kiss to Charlotte's cheek. Mama looks pretty, she said sweetly. Charlotte's heart warmed. Thank you, baby, she whispered. You look beautiful, too. Camila smoothed the skirt of her soft yellow dress, beaming with pride. I'm the flower girl. That's right, Charlotte agreed. A very important job. Now, where are those brothers of yours? With Grandpa, Camila chirped. Then you should hurry back before the ceremony starts, Charlotte urged, setting her daughter down. You wouldn't want to miss the beginning, would you? No. Camila gasped dramatically before dashing toward the back of the house, her curls bouncing with every step. As soon as Camila disappeared, Charlotte took a deep breath, raising her hands to gently pat her carefully arranged hair. A backyard wedding with 3 little ones running around was bound to be chaotic. She had no illusions about staying picture-perfect for long. Her elegant hairstyle would likely loosen, her makeup might smudge, and her dress would probably bear the marks of tiny hands before the night ended. But that was okay. Today wasn't about perfection. It was about love. Her mother stepped out through the side door, carrying Charlotte's veil with great care. Are you ready, sweetheart? She asked, holding it up. As ready as I'll ever be, Charlotte replied with a smile. Victoria nodded, carefully positioning the veil and securing it in Charlotte's hair with nimble fingers. She pulled the sheer fabric forward to veil Charlotte's face, then pulled her daughter into a warm embrace. He's a good man, Victoria murmured. I couldn't have hoped for a better son-in-law. Charlotte's heart swelled. I'm glad he finally knows what it's like to have a family who truly cares, she whispered. And I'm so grateful you're here today, Mom. It means everything to me. Of course, darling, Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. I wouldn't miss this for the world. Your father and I are so proud of you. You look absolutely stunning, and you're already a wonderful mother. I know you'll be an incredible wife, too. Charlotte swallowed past the lump in her throat. No more of that talk, she teased. If I start crying now, my makeup won't make it through the ceremony. Her mother chuckled. All right. I'll leave you to your father now. He'll be here in just a moment. She squeezed Charlotte's hand. I love you, sweetheart. Love you too, Mom. Charlotte took a steadying breath, willing her nerves to settle. Moments later, her father appeared, dressed sharply in his tuxedo. Dad. She wrapped her arms around him. He gave her a reassuring squeeze before taking her arm. Are you ready for this? She nodded, a soft smile playing on her lips. Yes. I'm ready. She and Ronan had chosen to keep their wedding small and intimate. Neither of them had large families, and their circle of close friends was limited. As Charlotte walked down the aisle on her father's arm, she glanced at the guests seated in neat rows. Ronan's parents were present, sitting side by side with neutral expressions. Charlotte was grateful they had come. Their relationship with Ronan had been strained, but she took this as a hopeful sign that they were making an effort. Perhaps, over time, things would continue to heal. On her side, a few college friends and former coworkers smiled encouragingly. Charlotte had also invited some friends she had made through her blog, an unexpected but rewarding journey. Her blog, where she shared her experiences as a mother of 3, had grown into something meaningful, and she was proud of how far she had come. None of it would have been possible without Ronan's unwavering support. As she reached the altar, her father lifted her veil, kissed her cheek, and gently placed her hand in Ronan's. He then stepped back to join her mother, watching with pride. Charlotte's gaze drifted to their children, and as always, she couldn't help but smile. Everything felt perfect. After the ceremony concluded, Ronan turned to invite their guests toward the dinner table set up across the lawn. A towering wedding cake was carefully carried out, and the caterers began serving dinner. That's a lot of cake, Charlotte mused as she took her seat across from Ronan at their sweetheart table. We'll be eating leftovers for weeks. Ronan chuckled. I don't see a problem with that. Charlotte laughed, shaking her head. Their meals arrived perfectly seared filet mignon and buttery lobster. Charlotte took a bite and sighed. This is amazing. I might not have room for cake at all. Ronan reached across the table, taking her hand in his. Have I told you how beautiful you look today? Charlotte's heart fluttered. He told her often, but today, it felt different. Special. I can't believe we're finally married, she whispered. I can't believe it took us this long, he teased. Before Charlotte could respond, a loud crash echoed across the yard, followed by a collective gasp. Charlotte turned and burst into laughter. The triplets had gotten too close to the cake table. It had tipped, sending the enormous cake cascading onto the grass. A significant portion had landed on Enzo's head, while Ricardo and Camila were coated in frosting. For a brief moment, the entire wedding party was silent. Then, Camila reached out, grabbed a handful of cake from Enzo's hair, and took a bite. Yummy, she declared. The tension shattered into laughter. Charlotte's mother hurried to gather the messy children, stopping by Charlotte's table on her way. I was supposed to be watching them, she sighed. Charlotte shook her head, still giggling. It's fine. This will be a great story to tell at their wedding someday. Her mother smiled, leading the little ones inside to be cleaned up. Ronan turned to Charlotte. That's a strange thought, isn't it? What is? Their weddings, he said, picturing them all grown up. Charlotte's chest tightened. They're already growing up too fast. Ronan squeezed her hand. Don't worry, love. Every moment with them will be an adventure. She nodded. He was right. A moment later, Ronan stood and tapped his champagne glass. I want to thank you all for being here today, he began. Most of all, I want to thank my wife. He turned to Charlotte, his voice filled with warmth. You've changed my life in ways I never imagined. You've shown me what it means to have a family, to love and be loved. I don't know where I'd be if I hadn't met you that day in Rome. Charlotte pressed her fingers to her lips, emotion welling up inside her. To Charlotte, to our children, and to family, the greatest gift of all. Ronan finished, raising his glass. Here, here. Charlotte's father called, lifting his own glass in agreement. Ronan reached for Charlotte's hand, guiding her to the dance floor. As the music began, he pulled her close, swaying gently. That was beautiful, Charlotte murmured. Ronan smiled. Every word was true. She rested her head against his shoulder, thinking about the life ahead of them. Whatever the future held, she knew one thing for certain: Ronan would always be by her side. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him softly. I love you, she whispered. He gazed down at her, his eyes filled with love. I love you too, Charlotte. To Rome and back. The end.